Hello everybody and welcome to this course about Nuxt 3. My name is Guillaume and today I'm really excited to introduce you to my favorite framework. Nuxt is a framework made on VueJS, and you might know that last year VueJS upgraded to the version 3. So Nuxt did the same and now we have all the features of Nuxt 3. With Nuxt.js, you can create full stack application, and it's a very interesting framework because there are several rendering modes. During this course, we are going to learn everything you need to know to create a full stack application with Nuxt. Here is the program of our course. We are going to learn first how to create an application. Then we are going to look at pages and routing, the file system that help us to create routes automatically. We will look at components, and the main feature of Nuxt is to auto-import the components, how to create layouts, how to deal with images and assets. We are going to look also at Composable, the new feature of Vue 3, how to create plugins and why, how to deal with middlewares to prevent authentication, for instance. We are going to learn what are modules, a specification of Nuxt.js that help us to supercharge our application. We are going to talk also about state management and especially about Pinia. One of the most interesting part of this course is talking about the rendering mode with SSR, SWR and hybrid mode, the new mode. Finally, we are going to look at servers with Nitro, how to create a server on our app. We will need also to know what are useFetch, useLazyFetch, useAsync data, those methods provided by Nuxt 3 to fetch data. Also, if you are interested to work with Nuxt, you might be interested also in SEO and metas for the rendering modes. We will look at Lifecycle hooks, how to configure our project. Then finally, we will finish our course on Nuxt content, a package or module that helps us to create static website with Nuxt. And finally, we will create a full stack application, which will be a documentation and an API. So if you are ready to follow this course, let's go! Nuxt.js is a JavaScript framework made to create front-end application. Nuxt.js has been built on top of Vue.js, a bit like Next.js for React. And there's a lot of features that help us to develop faster and that improve our developer experience. So when you go on Nuxt.com, the official documentation, we see now that we are on the version 3 of Nuxt. Because yes, Vue switched recently to the version 3. So Nuxt had to update its latest version. So when we click on Get Started, we arrive on an introduction page. But for us, we are going to go directly on Installation and we are going to go down. And here we see that we have a command npx nuxi init project name. So I'm going to copy paste that, go into my terminal. I'm going to give a name, so it's going to be my Nuxt project. And there we go, my project has been installed. The first thing we can notice when we arrive in this Nuxt project, and if you already did some Vue.js before, is that it's really light. There's only 6 files at first. So when we are going to type npm install, we're going to have our node modules. However, we don't have the folders that we have on Vue 3. For instance, on Vue 3, we got the source folder, we can have the public and assets. Okay, with Nuxt, it works a bit the same. However, the difference is that we will not have any source folder at first. We will have to create our own folders, page, component, etc., etc. And it's going to work like this because Nuxt is providing to us a file routing system that works on the organization of our folders. It will automatically create our routes. And another thing that is really cool is that with Nuxt.js, it's going to auto-import our components. So we will not have to import all of this. But we are going to see that in the next lesson. Type npm install to npm install our project. Then we are going to type npm run dev to just launch it in our browser and to look at it at first. Okay, this is done. And the first thing we can notice is that we have a node module folder and we also have this .nuxt folder. Yarn dev or npm run dev, it depends. And here I'm going to open my localhost 3000 And there we go, we've got our application running, which is actually this Nuxt welcome only. So our application is now set up. We can use it directly like this. If you want it, you can deploy it from now. It will work as it's supposed to work. And what we're going to do at first is just to remove this and put hello Nuxt free, because we don't need that component. All right, our app has been created, but it's totally empty. The first thing I'm going to do is to add a bit of configuration, because yes, with Nuxt.js we have a nuxt.config.typescript or JavaScript file that can help us to provide some configuration. So we have a method called define Nuxt config that receive an object, and in this object we can pass several elements. The topic of this course is not to talk about the configuration. The topic of this course is just to create an app. However, I'm going to do a bit of configuration at first before we start the course in order to follow every step. So the first thing I'm going to add, it's an alias. This alias will help me actually to catch some elements directly from the source. But you are going to say to me, Guillaume, you talked before about the auto-import feature. Auto-import is working for pages and component and some other folders, but not necessarily for everything. So we will necessarily need an alias. So this alias will be an @ okay? And here I'm going to say, hey, I need the path of my current project, and I want to be at the root. So I'm going to import resolve from path up there. All right, and here I'm going to resolve a path. So I'm going to start with dir name, and here it's going to be just the source, the root actually of my source. Okay, so now when I'm going to type @ everywhere in my app, it will resolve directly the dir name, so the dir name, which is actually the root of my folder, and I will be able to catch anything and to import dynamically every element of my project. Another thing is that I want to add a CSS file because we don't have any style in there. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a folder directly, which will be assets. And in these assets, I will add a main.css. If you want to add a CSS, it's okay. Me personally, I'm going to add SCSS. What I need to do now is to install Sass, because Sass is not installed. So I'm going to type npm install Sass. And I'm going to launch again the project. And what I want to do, I want that this main.css file would be actually root style sheet of my project. So what I can do is to type CSS, and CSS actually it's an array. So I'm going to specify on this nuxt.config.ts that I want to have one file as a CSS root file. You can have many other because it's an array. So here I'm going to add assets main.scss. To check if it's working, I'm going to add a body, and here it's going to be color red. And when I get back, there we go, we see that I have the color red apply. So it is working, it is applying my SCSS. Finally, for the need of this course, I'm going to install Tailwind CSS. So I go on Tailwind CSS on Get Started, then I click on Framework Guides. There I click on Nuxt.js, and I go on the version 3 because here we are on the version 2. So here we arrive there and we see that we have to install Tailwind CSS in our terminal. So I'm going to copy paste this, going back there. I'm going to stop npm install Tailwind CSS. There we go. Then I need to init my file. So I'm going to type npx tailwind css init. Then we need to specify to nuxt.config.js to use postcss and tailwind. So I'm going to copy paste this and I get back there. And just after my configuration, I'm going to add postcss, plugins, etc., etc. All right. Then finally, what I need to do also, it's to add actually to the tailwind.config.js right now, which is almost empty. It's to add here the content file that I need to watch. So let's have a look on this. I'm just going to copy paste and we're going to look at it. We will watch for components. So there will be a components folder. We will watch for layouts because they can be a layouts folder also. Pages, which will be the pages of our project. Plugins, but also for the nuxt.config.ts and of course the app.vue. So now it's done. What we need to do is to add those elements, Tailwind base, component, and utilities to our main.scss. And we already imported it to our project, remember, just up there on the CSS line there. So when I get down, it's telling us to do it, but we already did it. And now let's run again our project and let's see if it's going to work. And when I get back to localhost 3000, there we go. I think it's working because the font has changed. And if I go to the network on main.scss, we see that Tailwind is clearly imported. If you want to get this starter project, you can go on my GitHub, and down there you got the Nuxt free Tailwind starter. And when you click on it, you have the full repository available that you can clone directly. Finally, we are ready to follow this course and to learn how to create a front-end application with Nuxt free. One of the main features of Nuxt is its file system routing. What does it mean? Basically, in Vue 3, you are supposed to install Vue Router to deal with routing. Then you will have to create a root.js file, declare your routes, import your component or pages, and then organize all the nested routes, the navigation guard, etc., etc. With Nuxt.js, you don't need to do that, because there's a system inside Nuxt that helps you to deal with the routing automatically. And it's working with the pages directory. So we see here on the official documentation that every Vue file inside the pages directory creates a corresponding URL. So let's get back to our app and let's try to create a route. So I'm going to create a new folder called pages. And inside these pages, I'm going to create, for instance, an events.vue page. So here it's supposed to be /events as a corresponding URL. So I'm going to create a quick template, and in this template I'm going to type div events page. All right, it's good. But remember, in my app.vue I have this. And normally with Vue Router, if you already coded with Vue, you're supposed to use the router Vue built-in component that is provided by Vue Router. How does it work with Nuxt? Well, if we go back to our app, we already got an error. And if we try to access the page events, we have actually the page of app.vue. And this is a bit confusing because we're supposed to have events page and we finally have app.vue. It's really easy to understand. We have to say to Nuxt to use the router. So first, we are going to use a first built-in component, which is Nuxt layout, because later we are going to use the layout of Nuxt. And inside this Nuxt layout, we are going to use the router view built-in component. But actually, it's not router view, it's Nuxt page. Nuxt page here is working exactly like router view component with Vue Router. Now I've did that, I can get back. And on my /events route, I got the events page here display. However, if I get back to the root of my app, I got a 404. And it's totally simple to understand. I don't get any index at the root of pages. However, app.vue is supposed to be the root of our single page application. And it needs the first page to start. And this first page has to be index.vue inside my pages folder. So I'm going to type template div, and I'm going to say here index page simply. So I got an index.vue, which is the first page, so the root URL of my application. Then I got /events that is displayed there. So when I get back and I update, so maybe I got to start again my server for him to understand that I have an index page right now. And there we go, I got my index page display. And if I get to /events, I got my events page. All right, so it's really cool. Let's try to create a new page, and let's say that it's going to be my and dash profile.vue. Okay, and here I'm going just to copy paste the code that I have there. I'm going to close all of this. And I'm going to type my profile. See that it's also working. How cool is that? Okay, let's remove this myprofile.vue and let's create, instead of events.vue, a folder called events. And now we've got a problem because we've got this event.vue and events folder there. So what we can do is to move this events.vue here, and I can rename this as index.vue. So now what is it happening? It's that here when I go to events, it's taking my index.vue. And let's say that I want to create a file inside my events folder which relate to another route. Is that possible? Yes, it's possible, and it's going to create the full URL for us. So let's say that we've got an event, and here I'm going to have a profile.vue, the profile of the event, let's say. So I'm going to have a template tag div profile event there. I'm going to save, and when I get back and I type /profile, okay, because I'm in the events folder, and there we go, we access to the profile event page. How cool is that? It's amazing because we can create a lot of routes like this. And of course, if I wanted to create a new folder called profile, and inside I would like to add a new view, and which will be index inside, it could work. So you see, you can create really nested routes, and with this file routing system inside Pages, Nuxt will totally understand what you are trying to do and will build for you all the paths that you need. Let's say now that in event, I would like to have an ID actually that I would catch through my route. You can do that with brackets. So here I'm going to type ID between brackets .view, exactly like we would do in Vue.js. So I'm going to type template there, and I'm going to type div, and actually I'm going to have event ID, and here of course I would open my double curly brackets, and inside I would try to access to my route params.id, exactly like I would do in Vue.js. Okay, this $root is the object related to the current route, and here we're gonna catch the ID between the curly bracket, between the brackets, sorry, that we got in our Vue file. When I go to the page, event ID 12, for instance, there we go, we catch 12 as an element provided into the params, okay? It could be anything, it could be a very long number, it could be Guillaume, for instance, whatever. There we go, we can catch it this way. So when you want to make dynamic routes, you can use those brackets and put inside the parameter that you want to catch, and it's going to pass immediately through the route this parameter for you. Now, if you want to catch this parameter inside your script, so here I'm going to open a script. With Nuxt, we got auto import everywhere. So here we got available a method called useRoute. So I'm going to create a new variable, and here I'm going to use route, the method that helped me to access to the route. So I'm going to console log this route, and I'm going to get back, open my console, and what we see is that we got the route as a proxy object. What I can do is to type route.params, exactly what I would do inside my template. And here, there we go. We see that it catch actually the ID of my route. So I get route.params.id. And this method useRoute is available everywhere in the Nuxt application. And you will see when we get more deep into the course, everywhere in the Nuxt application, you have a lot of methods like this that are auto-imported everywhere you need them. You earn a lot of time by doing this. This is a good timing to show you another method that is very useful provided by Nuxt. Exactly like Next.js, if you know Next.js, you have the context available. Nuxt also got a context that is available. What you can use actually is the use Nuxt app function. Here I'm going to remove this. I'm going to type const Nuxt is equal to use Nuxt app. Use Nuxt app is actually a function that is available everywhere in the application to give us access to the current context. So here I'm going to console log Nuxt. I'm going to get back. I'm going to update. And look at that. We've got an object which is big and contains a lot of method and data. And if we look a bit closer to it, we see that we got access to what we call a context. This is actually the context of your current application. So here you got a function called useHead. We're going to see that later. We got VueApp that gives us access to all our Vue application with the instance, etc., etc. And all of this, hook, etc., etc., will help us to deal with some operation everywhere in the application when we need to. And on the official documentation, we've got a good definition of what is Use Nuxt app. Use Nuxt app is a built-in composable that provides a way to access shared runtime context of Nuxt, which is available on both client and server side. It helps you to access the Vue instance app, runtime hooks, runtime config variable, and internal state, such as SSR context and payload. Use Nuxt app will be very useful when you will create your own Nuxt application. You may need this context very, very often. Don't forget about it. Let's finish now to talk about the navigation. If I get back to my app.vue here, let's say that I want to create a header. And here it's going to be a header with a list, okay, of elements. So here I'm going to have a list, and inside this list I would like to have a link that pushes to the homepage. What I can use is Nuxt link, okay? And Nuxt link actually it's a built-in component that helps you to push to the route that you want. So here I want to push to home, so I'm going to type slash, and here it's going to be home, okay? And then let's say that I want to push to events, okay? So I'm going to type slash events. When I get back here up there, I got two buttons, so now it appears like a text. But when I click on home, I go on home, then I click on events, I go on events, okay? So use Nuxt link when you want to create a link that push to a route, and when you want to create actually some programmatic navigation. As you see, Nuxt is providing to us a very easy system to deal with the routes. We don't need to create a root folder. We don't need to import another package or another plugin to our application to deal with routing. Nuxt itself is built around this file routing system. And later you will need to deal with the authentication and deal with what we call middleware. If you need to prevent the entry on a page depending on the authentication, for instance, what you will need to do is to watch the course about middleware, because within this Nuxt context, actually, we can deal with middleware that prevent some actions depending on the user interface and depending on the user entry URL. It's time to talk about the components. With Nuxt 3, we got a feature called auto import, which basically means that every component are available everywhere in the application because it's auto-imported. So if we look at the documentation, it's written that most components are reusable piece of user interface, okay? And you can create these components in the components directory, and they will be automatically available across your application without having to explicitly import them. So previously on Vue.js, what we were supposed to do is to, every time we need the component, to import it everywhere we need it. We can also go on the main.js file and say actually to the Vue application to use the component, and we can import it everywhere also. It's a kind of auto import. However, with Nuxt, we don't need to do all of this. And that's really amazing because we save a lot of time. So we are going to create a folder, and here I'm going to close all of this. We're going to create a folder called components, okay, components. And here inside this folder, I'm going to create a first component called alert.vue. Okay, and this component is basically taking a div. This is an alert component. Okay, I'm going to add some style to it, so it's going to be a BG green 500. It's going to be rounded, px2, py1, and text white. There we go, and maybe a bit of margin bottom. All right, we've got this component. And right now we've got our app running there, an index page. I put the background in black to have a bit of more effect. And now I want to use this component alert in my index page. So I go on my index page, and what we used to do before is to go to script, and then we would say basically import alert from blah blah blah. We don't need to do that anymore. We can directly say, hey, here I want my component alert. Let's get back to the app, and suddenly we've got our component available. And that's amazing. That's why I love Nuxt. With Nuxt, we save time. So how does it work? Basically, it works like exactly pages with the file routing system. It's based on the name of the file, and it's based on the level of the current file. So if I create another component, let's say that it's going to be header.vue, and here I'm going to type this setup, and I'm going to put header here. If I go to my app.vue, and on top of that I'm going to type header because it's the name of the file, what's going to happen is that it's going to look for header as a component, as the file coming from the folder component. So you have to create this folder component to tell Nuxt, hey, I'm looking for a component, and this component is supposed to be in the component folder. So the component directory is playing a very important role in the Nuxt application. It's just the place where you're going to put all your interface pieces. So if we want to create a deeper component tree, actually, what we could do here is to create, for instance, let's create a folder and profile. And in there, what I can do is to type also index.vue. I'm going to type profile component. I'm going to close all of this and get back into my index.vue. And down there, I'm going to type profile. And when I'm going to type profile here, it will understand that he has to look for the profile. And here he found a folder and then index.vue, so he understands that it is the profile component. Let's say that in my profile component, I have another folder, and this folder would be header again. So we would have an index.vue there, and again, it's going to be profile header. How can I import this header here inside my index? What you got to do is to come from the parent to the children. So we've got profile at first, so I'm going to type profile, then I'm going to type header, because my component is supposed to be in the header folder. So from component, I want to look to profile, then I want to look to header, and inside header, I got this index.vue. So I'm going to type profile header. And if I get back to the app, there we go, it is working. I got my profile header. So to give a deeper understanding of it, I'm going to say that here it's going to be the main page. Now I'm going to open my console, and inside my console I'm going to inspect, and look at this. I got a first div which is ID Nuxt, and inside of it I got the root of my application. And what do I got? I got a div called header. We already imported it, but we didn't put the class header. So if I go there and I put the class header, we will understand that this is the header we are talking about. Okay, header. And then we got the main page. Because remember, in app, we got the header, then we're supposed to have the current page display. So we've got actually main, and then we've got our alert. So we didn't put alert, but if I go there and I put alert, it will work this way, alert, there we go. So we got the alert component, then we got the profile, and then we got the profile header. So you can go really deep like this. You can go really deep by creating component this way. And let's say that in my header, I would have an avatar.view. Okay? Here I'm going to put class. And again, here on VS Code, I got the path, profile, header, avatar. It really helped me to create my current component. So it's going to be profile, header, avatar. And actually, it's going to be avatar of profile header. I'm going to save. And now I want to import this avatar inside my profile. What can I do? Well, actually, it works exactly the same everywhere. Depending on where you are, you just need to always start by the component root. So here, what is the component I want to import? The component I want to import, it's avatar from header from profile. So I need to start by profile. Then I need to look to header. Then I need to look to avatar. And this is the component that has been created previously. I went to profile, then header, then avatar, and I've created this profile header avatar. And when I get back to the app, there we go. I got my profile avatar just after inside the profile header. It's a bit confusing when you got a lot of files like this. If I go to my index page, which is supposed to have profile, and I remove this, I got nothing. And if I want to use the avatar that is in the profile header avatar, what I can type, it's always the same. I can always import all those elements depending on their root. In this example, I made in purpose something complicated. I created several folders with several files inside because I wanted to show you that you can go from a simple organization to a complicated organization and to retrieve actually the path of the component because you are not importing them anymore and you are using the auto import feature of Nuxt. You will need to understand how to catch those levels. And the easiest way, as I said to you, is to come from the parent, then going to the children until the element you want to catch. What we notice with Nuxt 3 and the components, it's that this system helps us to not importing everywhere our components, and it gives us also the ability to call components everywhere we want dynamically. However, be safe. When you are creating your components architecture, try to be simple, try to be easy. Do not create really deep folder and deep files because otherwise you will have very long name at the end. If we get back there, for instance, we got a profile header avatar. It's a very long name, okay? You don't want at the end to have very, very long name because the readability and the developer experience will decrease. So this system is good. Nuxt made something great with this auto import. However, be careful on the usage. Sometimes in our application, we want to have separate design or we want to change the behavior of our app depending on the authentication, for instance, if we are logged in or logged out. For that, we can use what we call layouts. And of course, Nuxt.js helps us to deal with layouts. So right now I got my main page, and if I get back, I just got this page here, index.vue, that is created, and it's totally empty. And let's say that I want to create first a default layout for this page. What I'm going to do is first I'm going to create a layouts folder. Inside this layout, I'm going to create by default default.vue. Default.vue is going to be the layout by default. And we will see later that in our page, we will be able to declare what layout we want to use depending on the situation, depending on what layout you want to display actually. So here I'm going to create a template. And in this template, I'm just going to create a first div. And this div is going to be class. And I'm going to call that default layout this way. Okay, just for the example. Then what I'm going to write is just a P and I'm going to type default layout. So we will see that we are in the default layout. What I need to do now is to specify that here I want to put the data, I want to put the pages, I want to just display the current vision on what I want to display. So I need to use the built-in component slot. Slot here we receive actually our page which is index.there. So once I have done this, let's get back to my app. Let's refresh. And there we go. We see that without writing anything on my index.vue, I got this default layout that is displayed. And if I open my here my elements there, my console, I got the default layout that is applied. And we see that the page is a child of the default layout. All right. So we created our first layout. And if I apply some class, like for instance, text-white bg slate 900 and hscreen for this one, we will see that my style will be applied on the whole layout. So on all the children down there. So to create a layout, you use a slot. All right. Now let's try to create another layout, which will be a custom one. So here in layout, I type custom.vue. And actually what I can do is just copy pasting this custom layout. And instead I'm going to call it custom layout, and here it's going to be custom layout. Again, we need the built-in component slot in order to display the content we want to display. So now I've got this, I want to create another page, because default is for all the pages that are not asking for any other layout. But now I'm going to create another page, and let's say that this one will be, for instance, custom.vue, exactly the same name as the layout, but you're not obliged. It could be events or whatever. Okay, so now we set this, we have to create a page. So I'm just going to grab this one. It's going to be custom page, and here I'm going to type custom page. All right. The thing is now, if I go on /custom, so with my router, you know that it generated the route. If I go on /custom, what is going to happen? On the custom page, I got my default layout. And this is normal because I didn't specify any layout to use. When you want to specify a layout to use, in your script here, you are going to say that you want to use this layout on this custom page, all right? So what you need to use as a method is the define page meta. Define page meta is a function available everywhere in your Nuxt application that you can call to specify some parameters, because it's an object that is taken as a parameter. And here I'm going to use layout, and in there I'm going to use the name of the layout that I'm going to use. So you understood now that I want to use custom. Okay, I specified here on the custom.vue page that I want to use the custom layout. Now I'm going to close all of this and just open here my custom.vue. Now let's get back to the page and let's see if we get our custom layout. So when I get back, I got finally my custom layout. So back in the layout, I'm going to change just the color. Let's say that we're going to have a background blue. There we go, I got a background blue. Now I'm going to get back on the main page, and we see now that I switch from a layout to another one. So if I get back to custom, there we go, we've got another layout. So you understand now that we can use this layouts folder and we can create new layout inside this folder. They will be automatically registered with their name, and after in the pages you will be able to call this layout through the define page meta method. When you want to store style sheets, images or font, you usually use the assets folder. But with Nuxt, we got two directories that can handle these assets. These two directories are public and, of course, assets. Previously, we created an assets directory to put our main.scss, but I added two images there to show you how we can use assets to fetch our images. But first, let's have a quick look on the documentation and let's have an explanation on the difference between public and assets. The public directory content is served at the server root as is. The assets directory contains, by convention, every assets that you want the build tool, Vite or Webpack, to process. So what is the difference between public and assets? That's the main question here. Why do we got two different folders? And that's maybe why you are watching this video, because it's a bit confusing to have two different folders that we could use actually to store our images, font, or etc. etc. Let's start by explaining the assets directory. Let's have a look on the documentation. Nuxt uses Vite or Webpack to build and bundle your application. This is the tool that basically bundles your app. The main function of these build tools is to process JavaScript files, but they can be extended through plugins for Vite or loaders for Webpack to process other kind of assets like style sheet, font, or SVG. This step transforms the original file mainly for performance or caching purpose. So it is clear that the assets directory is processing an additional step to your style sheet, to your image, at the bundle actually. So here, this step is improving the performance of our files, and also it's working on caching. By convention, Nuxt uses the assets directory to store this file, but there is no auto scan functionality for this directory, and you can use any other name for it, which means that Nuxt is not watching at assets, it's just a static repository there that is here just for the dev, and there is no auto scan functionality, so it means that Nuxt is not watching to it. So you can name it the name you want. Here basically it's assets. Let's take an example. Here I got my app running, and in assets I added 2 images. So what I can do is to go on my main page, which is index, all right? And here in index, what I could do is to import this image. So I can take this example down there, and I'm going to add it just after my hello Nuxt, which we can actually put there, hello Nuxt free. There we go. And I'm going to catch my image called 1.jpg. I'm going to remove this alt, this useless alt. And there we go. And now I get back to my app. I got my image that is displayed. So this is the first way of displaying an image. And of course, after that, I could have had some CSS to change the size. Let's try to display the second image also. There we go. I got my second image that is displayed there. All right, this is the first way. Another way, instead of always using this path, what we could do is to use an alias. So I'm going to get back on nuxt.config.js, and remember, I have created this alias previously. This was the whole way to resolve paths, because now we can use root dir and source dir with Nuxt. So I can remove this one, and I could put, for instance, assets, okay? And here I can type slash, and I can use root dir. There we go, here, root dir, and I can close it. So here there's a mistake. I can close it with assets. Now I did this. What I can do directly, instead of having the wave that I got here, I can use @ and @ assets will play the exact same role as the wave and will retrieve for me directly in the assets folder the image. Of course, if I have a folder, I have to follow the path to this folder. And when I get back, it's also working. This is the second way of using the path, and of course it's very useful. Now let's talk about the public directory. We see that here I got a folder assets and one JPG file. If I want to access this image, what I could do is assets.jpg. But if I do that, of course I got a 404, because here Nuxt.js is not serving this folder. Remember, it says down there that Nuxt doesn't auto scan and doesn't take in order this folder into his build. All right. So basically, because it's processing actually, basically, if we want to have a public image with no process at all, because assets is processing, but public here is not processing, we can use the public folder. So here the public directory is used as a public server for static assets. All right, public server for static assets. So you're going to put the image into the public folder and it will stay as it is. There will be no compression, there will be no processing, nothing else, no resizing. It will stay as it is. The same for style sheet, the same for any other file that you will put in there. You can get a file in the public directory from your application code or from a browser by the root URL /. So let's try. Now I'm going to create a new folder at the root, which will be public. And I'm going to move my 2 images there into the public folder, and I'm going to try to access it. Back in my app, I type the name of my image as a URL, and there we go. I got my image available exactly like if I would take it from a server. And as you look at it, it's directly available into my URL, but there is no pre-processing of the image. This image will be available directly like this, and there will be no caching. So if I want to access this image, basically, what I can do is to directly use the slash. So here, instead of having all of this, I can just put the slash and here the two. So I'm going to get back on the app, and there we go. Slash will look directly into the public folder, which is very useful if you want to fetch another file like this. You can use directly the public folder. But remember, public means that it's public. So it's available on the app all the time. So you got to be careful if you want to store files or elements that you don't want to share. Don't put it into the public folder, put them into the assets folder. By using SVG as icons, you might ask yourself how to do it with assets and public folder. Well, actually, the thing is that with SVG, you would have to use a plugin for Vite to load them. And there is one called Vite SVG Loader that helps you actually to import the SVG from, for instance, the public or assets folder, and to render them directly like a component. So here you got this package that is available, and the only thing that you would need to do is to go on your vitconfig.js, and if you don't have it, you have to create it, and then you give the plugin a Vue or SVG loader. All right, so you can use a third-party plugin for Nuxt to load your SVG. However, you know that I like to give you the best tips to develop faster and efficiently in Vue.js, and if you want to, and especially Nuxt, and if you want to use SVG, my advice would be to go on icon.js.org. And the thing is that everything is a component in Vue.js, so basically icons can be also components. So let me give you an example. We are going to catch an icon. So here I'm going to look at it, and you will see that what we can do can be very cool. So here, if I type bell, and let's say that I'm looking for a bell icon in SVG, basically, let's say that I'm going to take this one. You see that on this website, on icon.js.org, I can download SVG as components. And here, we see that I got plenty other options. I can also do it in React, Svelte. I can download them directly. What I can do if I click here on component view, I can just come back, go on my component, and here I'm going to create a folder called icons. And in icons, I'm going to create a bell.view. And I'm going to copy paste, and directly I got my SVG that is appearing here. So let's say that now I want to catch, so I'm going to remove this image. I want to use my SVG icon, which is in my .vue file. How can I do it? Exactly like I explained to you for the components listen. I can simply call icons bell. And here icons bell is going to call in the component folder icons and bell. Now it's done. Let's get back to our application. And there we go. We've got our SVG that appears this way. It's way faster than using plugins that we can add to our configuration. So this was my tips. When you want to use icons, go on icon.js.org and use them directly as components. Vue 3 introduced to us the new concept of composables. If you already coded React application or Next.js application, you might know what are hooks. Well, basically, it's exactly the same as composables. However, with the Vue Composition API introduced by Vue 3, the idea is to split the code logic into several files instead of having the same logic everywhere mixed. Why we do that? Because it makes the code lighter, but also because it helps us to debug faster and to have some code cleaner. So we created in Vue 3 the composables in order to separate some code logic. So let's have an example because we need something concrete. Here I got two views. I got index.vue and I got profile.vue. And let's say that in index.vue I would have a function called sayHello with just console log hello. There we go. All right. And I want to trigger this function every time index.vue will be built. So back in my app, I open And there we go, I got hello that is console logged. Now let's say that I want to have the same function triggered in my profile.vue. Well, it's a bit dumb because I got the same piece of code written in two different places. And here the thing is that it's two different functions, even if they got the same name. They got the same name, so it means that they are supposed to do the same thing. Okay? But they have two declarations in two places. And that could be a problem because one could console log hello and the other one could console log goodbye. And that's a problem here because we wish that say hello could do the same thing. To solve that problem, we could create a composables that will contain our say hello function. So here I'm going to create a new folder, and this folder is going to be called Composables. And now you understood Nuxt 3. Auto import is the main feature. Of course, Nuxt 3 will auto import all our composables. So the convention says that with Vue 3, we should name the composables with a use before. So let's say that here we are going to call that useutils.ts. Here, what we're going to do, we are going to create a const, okay, called useutils that we are going to export. And this would be a function. Okay, so let's get back at our say hello. Let's say that in our function, we would have this say hello there. And now what we want to do, we want to return say hello. Now I got this file called useutils that I could use everywhere in my app because I have the auto import feature made by Nuxt 3. So instead of having this declaration there, what I can do is just destructure, okay, my useutils. And useutils come from where? It comes from this file composables. So Nuxt 3 understand that every file that is there has a function and is going to record this function. And here the function that we have is, of course, useutils. So I got useutils, and what I need to import is say hello. And now I got my say hello there that I can trigger. Of course, I can do exactly the same there. And now I don't get the problem that I have two different declarations. So here I can put hello from useutils. Back and I update, we see that I got hello from useutils. So I really encourage you to work as much as possible with composables. And now you understood that you don't need to import, okay? With Vue 3, you would have do this. You will have import from composables, etc., etc. You can have the big benefit of the auto import of the composables folder with Nuxt 3, and I really encourage you to gather all the business logic into composables because it's easier to read, easier to debug, and it doesn't make your code base heavier. It's a very good timing to talk about a very useful library that a lot of Vue and Nuxt developers are using. This library is called VueUse. VueUse has been created by Anthony Fu. He's really known in the Vue community, and there's a lot of other developers that help him. But basically, this VueUse library is working a bit like composables. When you install this library, you get tons of methods that helps you to develop faster and that improve your developer experience. Most of the time, if you would need to detect if you click outside, you would go into your composable and you would click a function called const on click outside. Okay, that's really basic. A lot of developers are doing this all the time. Well, the thing is that if you install VueUse, you don't need to do that. All you would need to do is to import click outside coming from the VueUse library. So as you see, you get some examples, and it shows that you will save a lot of time if you use this kind of library instead of creating your own function. And at the same time, think about something. The VueUse core team actually worked on many functions. Look at this. They thought about everything. So don't think that you could do better than an open source community that is working on that all the time. The code quality of this library is tremendous. It's amazing. So do not waste your time writing function, and here you got a lot of examples, you may have a trouble, and this trouble could be certainly solved by a function there. So I really encourage you to go on VueUse and to install this library to use it. If you coded in Nuxt 2, you might be familiar with the concept of plugins. Let me give you an example. Let's say that before you launch your application, you want to trigger some JavaScript. Well, actually, it's not really before you launch it, but it's at a certain time that you want to trigger some function. What you can do is to use plugins. Also, let's say that you would like to have a directive or some kind of function available everywhere in your app, and you don't want to use a composable to put this function and import it. You just would like to click. You would just like to have a Nuxt app.something to trigger your function. Well, what you are looking for are plugins. On the official documentation, we can read that Nuxt automatically needs the files in your plugin directory and loads them at the creation of the Vue application. So basically, what you need to do is to create, again, and it's always the same logic actually, and this is why I love Nuxt, I can create my plugins folder. And inside I will create a myplugin.ts. So let's create this first plugin, myplugin.ts, and there we go. The main difference is that those plugins can be called at the initiation of your Nuxt application. So I got myplugin.ts, and if I go down, I see that I need to type export default define Nuxt plugin. Let's go, let's type export default define Nuxt plugin. And here, as an argument, I can type the Nuxt app, because here at the beginning, I will have my context available. So let's console log this Nuxt app that we already saw before. And there we go. Now I did this, I can go back to my app and try to trigger again. And look at that. What I have is that before my composables function that says hello from useUtil, I have my Nuxt app context available. However, in Nuxt, if we are using plugin, it's because most of the time we would like to have some directive or to have some function that we could trigger everywhere, like I said at the beginning of this course. In order to do that, we have an amazing example there, really simple to understand. It's that we create our plugin and we return an object, and inside this object we got a provide key. And this provide key will tell actually to Nuxt, hey, record this as a function or directive list, because it's an object, that will be available everywhere in my app. So let's create our own directive. And here is going to be exactly a bit like this example, I guess. So I'm going to get back there, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to return an object. And in this object, I'm going to return provide, and provide here will wait for something. Say hello, okay? Say hello. I got say hello, which actually will take a message, which would be a type string, and it will console log, okay, my message. So I got hello message, there we go. Now I've got this, okay, now I've got this, I can go to my index.vue and I can call my hello function. So how I can do it? Well, it's really easy to understand. We see down there that I can import hello from Nuxt app. And I'm going to import my hello function, which is here. But actually it's not hello, it's say hello. So say hello actually will be available. And if you look at the object, what I got now is a $say hello. So what we're going to do first is to console log this use Nuxt app, which will return to me the context. And if I click and I look down, I got down there, I got this say hello function. So now everywhere in my app, I got this say hello function that is available. What I can do now is to use this function say hello simply by typing $say hello, and here I'm going to put Guillaume, for instance. And when I get back and I update, there we go, it's working. Often plugins are used to inject into the Nuxt context all the logic of a certain library. Let me give you an example for Firebase. If you would like to have Firebase installed on your Nuxt application, you would use a plugin. Even if there is a module for Firebase that maybe we are going to see later. As I said to you, here we got a very good example on the Nuxt documentation, we can use plugins for third library. And here we got the module VueUse tag actually to add Google Analytics tags to your Nuxt application. A last example is to change the view directive. And here we've got another example. Here we are going to create a plugin and we see that we inject again into our Vue app inside the Nuxt app the directive focus. And in this directive focus, we are specifying behavior. So this is something else that you can do inside your plugin folder. You could change your directive directly there and say from the start of the app, hey, I want to change a behavior and this is what I want to do. So in plugins, you can have custom plugins that you create for yourself and that create some triggers. You have plugins that are related to modules, and you have plugins that are related also to directive. Actually, you can create the plugin you want, and that's the force of Nuxt.js. One of the main reasons I moved from Vue free to Nuxt free, it's because of the routing system, but also because of middlewares. Because with Nuxt free, what we can use is middlewares, those files that will trigger some operation before we switch from a route to another one. So you understood now that we can deal with authentication with middleware, and I can say that with Nuxt free, it's so useful. Let's have a quick look on the documentation. Nuxt provides a customizable root middleware framework you can use throughout your application. Ideal for extracting code that you want to run before navigating to a particular route. That's amazing. I don't know if you realize, but that's amazing because we can deal with several cases we want to deal with thanks to authentication. There are three kinds of root middleware: anonymous or inline root middleware, which are defined directly in the page where they are used. So I get back to my app and I'm going to create a folder called middleware. And I'm going to create a new file. And let's say that this file is going to be called auth.ts. In this auth.ts, I'm going to export default a method called define Nuxt. And here be safe because what we want to have is define root middleware. So this method provided by Nuxt helps us to catch several parameters. To and from are from them. So here I'm going to use to, from. Now what I'm going to do is to console log this to and this from. All right, so now I got my middleware, and you probably understood that there's a mistake because I want this middleware to be triggered everywhere. So if I get back to my app and I update, I don't get anything that is console log. And here on the line 2 and 3 of my auth.ts, I'm supposed to have defined a Nuxt root middleware. So on every route, it's supposed to execute all the code there. It's because here, the global root middleware is supposed to have a global suffix. So what I'm going to do is to rename and put here auth.global.ts. Now I get back to the app, I update, and there we go. We see that now on this route, I have my two elements that are triggered. The first, it's to, this is the route I'm going to, and from, this is the route I'm going from. So I'm going to put slash, and I think I already got a root profile there. And as you see, and I got data from where I come and where I go. So it's really useful to use this global actually middleware that can help us to trigger some operation. Let's take an example, and let's say that we want to check on every route of our application if we are logged in or not. And we would check that with a variable, okay, is logged in. Okay, which will be on false. All right. Well, the thing is that later we will have a store, and in this store we will have some kind of variable like this. So we will be able to check the store first to see if we are logged in or not, and then we could take some decision. But there, what we need to do is to check with if we are logged in or not. Otherwise, if we would not be logged in, we would redirect. We would redirect to a login page. And there, what we want to do, we want to redirect, actually, to the page we want to go. And this page, we have it because we have two. Two, it's the destination. Two is the destination. So what I can do is console log my two. All right. So when I get back there, I update, and actually I'm going to go exactly there. Okay. I see that where I want to go is to the full pass. So what I can do is to use a method that is written there called navigate to. Navigate to, and not from, to.fullpass. If we are logged in, we say, okay, you can go to the destination you want to go. Otherwise, if you don't want to, you have to navigate to, and the page here could be login. So this is a quick example on how we could create an authentication system on every route. But what happens if I remove this global? Here we already saw that when I remove this global, and I'm going to remove this example, I'm going to say just console log hello from middleware auth. There we go. We saw that nothing is happening there. So when I update, nothing is happening on my index page. What you can do also, you can specify to your page that you want to use this middleware auth. So here in my page that I want to add a middleware to, I can type define page meta. And in this function that we already saw to define the layouts, but we can also use to many other things like title, etc., etc., we can say, hey, I want to use a middleware, and this middleware is going to be auth. Let's check that, and when we get back, we see that hello from middleware auth. If I go on profile, I don't get this hello from the middleware. And what I would need to do is to do exactly the same thing on profile.view. There is also a method that you could use, for instance, inside a plugin, and this method is simply add root middleware. Well, basically what we could do is to say to our plugin to add a root middleware, and we define this by the name of the plugin, then by the function and everything that you want to trigger inside of it. And you can specify at the end if you want it to be global or not. That's another way of adding a middleware, which is very convenient with Nuxt 3. It's that you can set up authentication really fast depending on your middleware. That's an amazing feature for me. With Nuxt 3, we can use what we call modules. And actually, we had already this in Nuxt 2. Modules are like libraries. You have to install them and add them to your nuxt.config.js. Also, modules are made to simplify your integration and simplify your developer experience. These Nuxt modules are actually running asynchronous when your Nuxt application is launched. And these modules can be created by anyone. They can be published on NPM in order to help other developers to save time, to help you to develop faster. We've got Tailwind, for instance, and if we click on Tailwind, because we already installed Tailwind on our Nuxt.js application, we see that on the installation command, we've got a prefix called @nuxt.js/tailwindcss. It means that this module, this specific library, is made only for Nuxt.js. And with the @Nuxt.js, we understand that we call actually the Tailwind version for Next.js. But what is the main difference with a current library? Well, if we get back, we see that here we have a definition called a supercharge. So a module is here to supercharge your Nuxt project. So we understand that this is a plus that goes directly inside the real lifecycle of Nuxt. So let's get down and let's install, for instance, a package, a module called Nuxt content. So how do we install Nuxt content? Well, and how do we install Nuxt module most of the time? Well, which is cool is that we have often a documentation that comes with the modules that have been created by the developer. And that is really useful because when you click on it, we arrive on a new website, on a new documentation that explains to us how to use this specific package. There, I'm going to click on Get Started for Nuxt content, and we see that I don't get a new project. I want to add my new project. So what I would need to do is to add this, this module by stopping my server and just typing yarn add --dev at nuxt/content. I'm going to type enter, and after the installation, I am able to see that in my list, I got Nuxt content as a dev dependency. So it's not finished, because with Nuxt, what we need to do when we want to use modules that are entering inside my Nuxt cycle, actually, my Nuxt context, I need to specify to my Nuxt application to use this module. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to get back and go on nuxt.config.ts. And here I'm going to type modules, which is an array. This array is waiting for different modules. And we see here that type9 proposed me already Axios as a package or proxy. But me, I'm going to use Nuxt content. And when I get back, I'm going to type enter there. There we go. And now I got Nuxt content. So I'm going to type yarn dev. And actually, you will see that here for this specific package, nothing will have changed. However, if I want to use Nuxt content, we see that I have to create a content folder. So I'm going to type content. And inside, I'm going to create an index.md because Nuxt content is a package to render markdown files. And now with Nuxt content, Nuxt understands that he has to look at content. So I'm going to type hello world. And if I want to render this content, I have to use a built-in component called content-doc. So I'm going to close this, I'm going to get back. And now this built-in component, content-doc, is available because I installed this module and I specify in nuxt.config.ts to use it. So I'm going to go on my main page, and inside, instead of having this hello, I'm going to put content-doc. And when I get back, I got my content. So as you see, there are many modules that you can use. For instance, E18N, which is actually for internationalization, and it's always working the same. What you need to do is to install the corresponding package and then to add it to your module array inside your nuxt.config.ts in order to use it. Most of the time, you will look for a library to use in Nuxt. Well, before doing that, I highly recommend you to look at Nuxt modules because maybe there's already a developer that did the work for you and created a package that will help you to go faster in your developer experience. When we create a front-end application, we often need a state management system. What is this exactly? Well, when you have a view and you declare some variables inside this view, you have what we call a scope, and these variables are available only in that scope. However, sometimes we need to have some kind of state management to just share, for instance, the data or variables between component, pages, and everywhere in your application. For that, we use a state management system. And of course, with Vue3, if you already coded a Vue3 application before, you might know Vuex or Pinia. But with Nuxt 3, we have a new solution, which is useState, and we are going to look at it right now. Nuxt 3 provides useState composables to create a reactive and SSR-friendly shared state across components. SSR-friendly, what does it mean? Later in this course, we are going to look at rendering mode, and SSR means server-side rendering. Here, Nuxt is talking about useState, and useState is a ref replacement. So if you don't know ref, it's a new function provided by Vue3 that actually will create for us a proxy variable that will be reactive. If you want to know more, I highly recommend you to look at reactivity in Vue3. Let's have an example. Here we have a basic usage that I'm going just to copy-paste. So I got my app there. I'm going to remove all of this and use the official, the official example. So when I get back, there we go. We see that when I click, I increase or decrease my counter. And my counter is up there and is using a user state counter, which is returning actually a value. All right, that's really interesting. But what we are looking for actually is to have some kind of store or state inside our app. So here it is working, all right? But here we see that we have shared state, and this might be what you are looking for. Go to our composables and let's create a new file called states.ts. By the way, in the previous course of Composables, I told you that the convention is to use as a prefix for your composables. It seems that here in this example, it's not respecting the convention. Here I see export const there. I'm going to copy this, all right? And there we go. Now I got this state.ts through Composables that is injected inside my whole application. And so I got two values available, use counter and use color. And the thing is that here we would like it to work like a state in VueUse. Why do I take VueUse as an example? Because if you did Nuxt 2 before, you knew that a folder store would be already written by default. And in this store, every store that you would create would follow the path of VueUse. So basically, you would have VueUse store that will be auto-imported, auto-injected inside your Nuxt content application. Actually, every store that would be created inside this store folder would be injected directly into the Nuxt context of your application. Here we've got an example of a VueUse store, and basically there's a state, there's mutation, there's actions, there's dispatch, all right? But this is for VueUse. In the example provided by Nuxt 3, we see that this use state can work exactly like a store and can return actually just an object or a value that could change. So what we want to test? We want to test that is this counter will have actually the same value everywhere in my app. So here, instead of having counter there, I'm going to call use counter, which actually comes from my state. Here I got my use counter. And what I want to do, I want to create a component, and let's say that we're going to have a counter component, counter.view, that would have exactly the same code as in my app. Now I've got this, I can create a new div, and next to it, I'm going to call my counter. So I will have a double counter. Here, what I can do is to put an ID, and let's put the ID main, and here I'm going to put another ID, which will be counter. When I get back to my app, we see that I got these two different files. I got this file, which is the counter, and I got this one, this scope, which is main. I want to be sure that my state in counter will also change. So let's click, and we see that actually my state is changing in the two components. Here we've got what we call a shared state. We can define global type-safe states and import them across the application. So the main question would be, Guillaume, why we will use a state.ts that will be actually a composables instead of using VueUse or Pinia? That's the question I ask myself also. And I found this very good article on viewmastery.com, which is a reference about Vue, written by Michael Thiessen. And this article is called Nuxt Free State Management, Pinia versus Use State. And here Michael is asking the same question as me. Do I use Nuxt Free Own State Management Solution Use State, or should I use Nuxt Free with Pinia? Which is better? Well, here is the short answer provided by Michael Thiessen. Pinia is what you get if you keep adding more and more features to user state. More complex apps will benefit from the extra features in Pinia, but user state is better for small and simple apps. This is the short answer, and I think everything is said there. If you have a big application and once your user state is heavier, you should use a state manager like Pinia. Otherwise, if you have a small application, you better use useState. And if you want to know more about why we use useState instead of ref, what is state hybridization, and what are all the problems around it, and why to use either useState or ref, I recommend you to read this article. Otherwise, we will have to install Pinia as a state manager. Because yes, even if I showed you this state management system by Nuxt free, I also want to show you a bit of Pinia, because yes, for me, I can't make a course about Nuxt free without talking about Pinia, which is an amazing state manager. So let's have a look. Let's install Pinia. And so I'm going to stop my server and I'm going to type yarn add Pinia Nuxt. So you understood now that this Pinia Nuxt is a module that I'm going to add. And if you want to look at it, you can go on the module page of Nuxt free to find it, or otherwise you go on pinia.vuejs.org and you look for Nuxt.js. So I'm going to get back to my nuxt.config.js and I'm going to add Pinia Nuxt. There we go. Now what I got is that I can use the store outside of setup. So I'm going to type yarn dev again, and I'm going to create a new folder at the root of my application, and this new folder will be stores. Actually, in this folder, what I'm going to put is actually, my store. They call it my store. As an example, my store.js. So now I need to create my store. So when I get back, I got an example there. I got several examples actually. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to copy paste this use counter store. There we go. So how does a store is working? As I said to you, with Pinia, we got state, getters, and actions only. All right. So now with the state, we are returning some value, and we got getters that are actually like computed function that will return to you the value when it's updated. And then we got action. Only the action are supposed to mutate our store. We've got another option. We can write our store with the Vue free way. So here, as you see, we've got ref, we've got computed, we've got increment. So when I get back there, I have the old way of doing it. Now I'm going to copy paste and we are going to look quickly at the difference. Down there, we have the Vue free composition API that has been used. And up there, we have the Vue 2, which is actually used with the option API. State are replaced by reference and getters are replaced by computed properties. I decided to keep it on the Vue free way, so with the composition API. I got my store. I'm going to import my store, which is use counter store. I'm going to create a variable called store, which we call actually the counter store. And I want to console log it. When I get back to my app, we see that I have the proxy that represents actually my store. And if you are using Vue DevTools, which is actually an extension for Chrome, you can see that there we've got access to our Pinia stores and we've got our counter just in here. We see that there are several ways of dealing with the state management inside Nuxt free. You can have the user state through Composables, or you can use Pinia, which is a more complete library or module to help you to deal with state management across pages and components. Which is brand new with Nuxt free, it's this server directory that can help us to create actually a backend and to deliver some functionalities that are related actually to API. So on the official documentation, we can read that Nuxt automatically scans files inside the server directory, API, and server routes, and also server middleware directories to register API and server handlers with HMR support. So what we can see is that we can use the define event handler. And this handler can directly return JSON data, a promise, or use event node.res.end to send a response. All right, let's go directly into the subject and let's create a server API folder. So here I'm going to create a new folder at the root of my application. I'm going to type server. And inside, because I want to follow the documentation, I'm going to create an API folder. So I'm going to click on there, and here I got an API folder. So now if I follow what is written on the documentation, I understand that now I can create an endpoint. And which is cool is that when we look there, we see that later we will be able to fetch, okay, we will be able to fetch a root slash API slash hello if we are creating a hello.ts file. So to start, we are going to copy paste this code, and I'm going to create a simple hello.ts file. And there we go. So my server is running, and we see that in my console, there is this Nitro build in 400 milliseconds. What is this Nitro? We are going to see that just after. So I'm going to get back there, and I'm going to open my application. So my application, it's there. And if I type slash API slash hello, I'm supposed to have an endpoint that responds to me, actually what we wrote before. And when I type this, there we go. So now we see that our Nuxt.js application, it's not only about front-end, it's also about back-end. We have an endpoint that is available, and here that is answering to us a JSON object. So Nuxt now has a role of a front-end framework, but also of a back-end framework. Actually, it was already the case before, but now we see that we can create our own endpoints and to do some back-end. So let's just console log this event object that we've got there. So I'm going to open this. I'm going to get back, and I'm going to type again on the endpoint. And we see here that we've got an h3 event object with a context Nitro and a big node object. And we can see there that we've got everything that we need to handle this node call. So, and we got also a res with a server response, etc., etc. So we can see that here we can catch events going to this API folder and to this API, actually hello.ts endpoint on our API. Okay, but what is the point to have a backend on my front-end application? Well, it can be for many reasons that you would need a backend for your application. For instance, if you want to provide some triggers or provide some action that you would do not on the front-end side but on the back-end side, now Nuxt.js gives you the opportunity, exactly like Next.js, because we can do the same with Next.js, it gives you the opportunity to actually put some business logic on the back-end side and not on the front-end side. So how does it work? Well, basically on the server where you are going to host your Nuxt.js application, it will also run the backend, and it will provide the operation on the backend side and not on the client side. If you never did some backend before, I highly recommend you to dive deep into Node.js, or at least a little bit, to understand how we create backends. It's not that you have to learn everything about the backend to handle this part of Nuxt.js. However, if you want to create some triggers and some endpoints. However, it's always good to have some knowledge to start creating endpoints on a backend such as this one. If we continue to read the documentation, we see that we can make some call there, and we are using a method with a $fetch. However, what is this $fetch? Well, we are going to see this in the course data fetching. But for now, I'm just going to copy this code there, and I'm going to get back to my application, so on the front-end side, and I'm going to open my console. And what I'm going to do, I'm going just to copy-paste this code. So I'm going to get back there. I'm going to go on index, and up there, I still have my content doc, which is there, which it's okay. What I'm going to do, I'm going to type await fetch API hello. So we have a top level await there. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to type const response, and I'm going to console log my response. And when I get back, there we go. We see that my front end called my backend automatically, and it called the API folder with the endpoint I have created in there. See that in the same application, we can do full stack operation. because we can have a front end and a back end, so it can be very useful. If we continue, we see that down there we've got a server root option, and it is written file inside the server API are automatically prefixed with API in their root. Yes, that's what happened here when I type /API/hello, which is the name of my file. Hello is, of course, the name of the endpoint. I got an API there in my URL. Maybe I don't want it. So for adding server roots without API prefix, you can instead put them into server roots directory. So let's get back, and at server here, I'm going to create a new folder called roots. And in there, I'm going to copy paste my hello.ts that I got there. However, I need to change the code of this file. So I'm going to get back there, and I'm going to type hello world from roots folder. I'm going to save, and now I'm going to get back, and instead of having API hello up there, what I'm going to type is just /hello, and it will work exactly the same. However, the difference here is that I didn't return a JSON, I just returned a simple string. If I would like to return a JSON, I could do exactly the same as I did in the API folder. So back in my roots folder now, I'm going to just open these brackets this way. Hello from roots folder, and I'm going to save, and I'm going to get back. I'm going to type again, and there we go, I got my JSON there. We just saw two ways of creating server endpoint on Nuxt.js. We saw the API folder, which will prefix all your endpoint with /API/. Otherwise, if you want to create root without the API/, you can put your endpoint inside the roots folder. Your file, they look like they export a default define event handler method. And inside, every time you can provide operation, you can trigger actions, whatever, but every time you have to return at the end the result of your endpoint. You know me, I try to give you all the best practice all the time. When you are creating a file like this, it's creating actually an endpoint. And this endpoint will take the name of your file. Well, try to be concise every time you are going to create some endpoints. The name of the endpoint should be really logic and follow some pattern. Here, what we do, we are creating a hello root. And this root is supposed to have a method. The method can be post, get, patch, delete, whatever. So the best practice that I want to give you now is to actually always put a suffix at your root. Here we have a root hello, and the method is supposed to be get. So I'm going to type get. And now we understood that actually this root is supposed to be a get method. So if you are going to try to post to this root, it's not gonna work because the suffix is now get. When you put just hello.ts, it's like you are doing anything you want. So remember in Node.js, or if you don't know, in Node.js, when you are creating an app, you can specify the method by typing app.get, app.post, app.patch, and then you provide an action. Here, what it does actually, without putting a suffix, it does an app.all. It means that it's going to receive any request depending on the method. So the best way is always to specify. Of course, if you get a post, instead of get, you're going to put a post. If you get a delete, you're going to put a delete, etc., etc. Previously on the server part, we talked about Nitro. Because when we launch our application on Nuxt 3, if we look at the terminal, we can read that Nuxt is running on Nitro. What is Nitro? Well, actually, Nitro, it's a server engine. And actually, on the official documentation, we've got some information about Nitro. Nuxt 3 is powered by a new server engine, Nitro. It is cross-platform support for Node.js, browser, service worker, and more. Because before, Nuxt was running on Node.js, now it took Nitro, this new engine, that helped us to make Nuxt 3 running. Serverless support out of the box, API root support that we saw already on the server part, automatic code splitting, async loaded chunks, hybrid mode for static plus serverless site, and we will see that this hybrid mode is the brand new feature of Nuxt 3, development server with hot module reloading. There's also a website for Nitro on nitro.ngs.io, and if we click on Get Started, suddenly we see that on the documentation, we recognize what we've got on our server part on Nuxt 3. We see that we have this method called define event handler. And we see that we can create actually a backend, a server with Nitro. So why Nuxt 3 decided to use Nitro? For many reasons, and one of these reasons is that we can use the cache API to cache elements. Okay, so the thing is that Nuxt.js is really known for its SEO performance and its server-side rendering modes. We are going to see later the modes. However, now let's talk a little bit at how we can cache element with Nuxt 3. Basically, what's going to happen when we use SSR is that every time we are requesting a server, the server is going to build the application and deliver it to the client. The difference with the SPA mode is that on the SPA mode, everything is done on the client side. With the SSR mode and the hybrid mode that we are going to see later, we can cache elements, which means that instead of every time there is a request, our Nuxt application has to be built, we cache the element every 5 minutes, for instance, and every 5 minutes somebody is going to come, it's going to build a cache version, and during these 5 minutes, it's going to deliver the content to the next call. Also, Nitro provides to us a built-in storage layer that can abstract our file system or database to any data source. And that can be very useful, especially if you are doing some Redis. We can store actually some elements when we need them. Then, of course, it is a backend, so we can use the router handling from Nitro that help us to create some routes and some endpoints to provide some operation. And which is really funny, and at this point of the course, you already saw a lot of auto imports with Nuxt.js. We have also auto import with Nitro. What I like especially about Nitro also is that there is a deployment documentation that helps you to deploy, for instance on Netlify, that helps you to deploy Nitro if you want to use it also separately from Nuxt.js. So it was necessary for me to talk about Nitro, to have a quick presentation of it, because this course is not about Nitro, it's about Nuxt. But if you want to do some backend on the Nuxt side, you might want to focus on Nitro, and especially to go, for instance, on the official repository, which is on NGS organization. NGS, it's actually basically what the organization that created Nitro, but not also Nitro, some other methods that are used inside Nuxt.js 3. This is probably the most important lesson of this whole course about Nuxt, and this is probably the one you were waiting for, because Nuxt.js is really known for its options about rendering. So previously in the lessons, I was talking about how you can render differently your applications, and it's not related to Nuxt.js. However, Nuxt.js is providing many options that are very useful when you want to take care about the SEO of your application, for instance. So for this lesson, we are going to look at two documentation. The old one, the one about Nuxt 2, and then we are going to switch to the Nuxt 3 to see the difference. What is rendering? Well, we can look at a good definition about rendering on the new documentation, and we can see that here it's written, both the browser and server can interpret JavaScript code to render Vue.js component into HTML elements. So we can see that we can render our application from Vue.js component into HTML element on the client side and on the server side. This step is called rendering. Nuxt supports both client-side and universal rendering. The two approaches have pros and cons that we will cover in this section. But before, let's get back to the old documentation and let's look at how it was written before. We talk directly about server-side rendered seats or server-side rendering, SSR, and static site. Server-side rendered sites are rendered on the server each time the user requests a page. Therefore, a server is needed to be able to serve the page on each request. Static site, which is the opposite of SSR, are very similar to server-side rendered application, with the main difference being that static site are rendered at build time. Therefore, no server is needed. The static sites, they are not built every time there's a request. They are built at build time, when you type npm run build, for instance. So it makes a big difference because on static site, it's difficult to fetch the data and build your HTML document to deliver it to the browser, because when you are fetching the static website, it is already built. So the data is static there. So for SEO reasons, what you want to have is that when the robot is arriving on your website, you may want to have all the data or the fresh data already fetched and completed, interpolated everywhere. For that, you will use SSR. And with Nuxt 2, we had the option SSR true, which we could put on nuxt.config.js or ts. So when I go on nuxt.config.ts, if I want to put the SSR mode, the only thing that I have to type is SSR, then true. And from there, my application now will be built on the server side. And it doesn't change something immediately on your application, but this new rendering mode actually changes a lot of things in your data lifecycle. If we look at the new documentation again, we have some explanation. Client-side only rendering. Out of the box, a traditional Vue.js application is rendered in the browser, in the client. So the computer actually, not the server or the phone. Then Vue.js generates HTML elements after the browser downloads and parses all the JavaScript code. And this schema is explaining it very well. The browser downloads an empty HTML document. Then the browser downloads and runs the JavaScript. And the app is rendered and interactive. This is the client-side rendering. We see that the JavaScript is not executed. We got pros and cons about this technique. The development speed is a pro. When working entirely on the client side, we don't have to worry about the server compatibility of the code. For example, the using browser-only API like the window object. Because yes, on the server-side rendering, you don't get any window object. So that's a problem. But however, it's a development speed feature that is a pro of the client-side rendering. It's cheaper running a server at the cost of infrastructure, and we've got also other problems related to this. And offline, because code entirely runs in the browser, it can nicely keep working while the internet is unavailable. Which means that with the client side only, when you fetch the application, you don't need anymore to have actually internet running. Instead, if you are fetching some data, but it can work offline, which is amazing. The cons of the client-side rendering is the performance. The user has to wait for the browser to download, parse, and run the JavaScript file. The server-side rendering is faster, and the client-side needs actually a good internet connection, and it needs also memory to make the work, to render the application in the browser. With the server-side rendering, it's faster. And finally, that's the main topic, with the client-side rendering, we have very bad SEO performances. And that is maybe why you are watching this video. This is because you would like to have good SEO performance on your Nuxt application. And with the client-side rendering, this is very bad to do SEO. Actually, it's useless to try to do SEO because your page is not rendered at the right time. And as written here, we can see that as search engine crawlers, so the robot of Google, for instance, won't wait for the interface to be fully rendered on their first try to index the page. So if you have a SEO problematic on your project, you should do server-side rendering. Then you got what we call universal rendering, client-side plus server-side. Well, it's actually the server-side rendering. What happens is that when the browser requests a URL with universal rendering enabled, the server returns a fully rendered HTML page on the browser. So as I said to you, it's going to make the work for you and just send you the page. Whether the page has been generated in advance or cached and is rendered on the fly, at some point, Nuxt has run the JavaScript code in a server environment. Making a static page interactive in the browser is called hydration. That's what we saw before. That's a good definition of hydration. So basically, this universal rendering is working this way. The fully HTML is sent to the browser and rendered. So the work here has been done about all the data completed on the server side. Then the browser download and run the JavaScript in background. Then a new step is coming on our cycle. Because at that time, we need to get this hydration step complete. And hydration, again, it's making a static page interactive in the browser. So when you use SSR, you might have some errors related to hydration. It's maybe because you didn't make the static page interactive in the browser. It didn't take time to complete, actually, the interactivity of your page. It's a very common error that you get when you are doing some SSR. What are the pros and cons of SSR? Of course, it's the opposite of the client side. We got a search engine optimization pro, which is very big. Universal rendering delivers the entire HTML content to the page, to the browser, as a classic server application. Web crawlers can directly index the page content because at this step we have the hydration and then we got also the page content already rendered, which makes universal rendering a great choice for any content that you want to index quickly. Then, of course, you get the performance. User can get immediate access to the page content because browser can display static content much faster than JavaScript generated one. However, with SSR and universal mode, we've got some cons. And the first, for me, it's the developer constraint that is written there. Server and browser environment don't provide the same APIs, and it can be tricky to write code that can run on both sides seamlessly. Of course, writing HTML, CSS, Vue.js, React, whatever, on client side is a different behavior than writing it on the server side. When you choose to work on the server side, you will encounter maybe errors that you never encountered before, and you will have to deal with it. However, the Nuxt documentation is very well provided to deal with those problems. Also, it's a problem of cost. A server needs to be running in order to render pages on the fly. This adds a monthly cost like any traditional server. Of course, because you are not just delivering some pages, you are making your server running to make the work instead of the client's browser. So it has a cost, of course. However, the server costs are highly reduced thanks to the universal rendering with the browser taking over on client-side navigation. Why do we use universal rendering? Well, for blogs, marketing website, portfolio, e-commerce website, and marketplace. Finally, by default, Nuxt uses SSR or universal rendering to provide better user experience and performance to optimize search engine indexing. What is new with Nuxt 3 and what was not in Nuxt 2, which means here? It's the hybrid rendering. Hybrid rendering allows different caching rules per route using route rules and decide how the server should respond to a new request on a given URL. So now basically with this hybrid thing, what we can do is that we can specify on each page what strategy we want to choose, either client-side, either universal rendering or server-side rendering. But also what we can deal with is caching. And as I explained before, what we can do is to choose when we want to cache our page and to put an interval between the time we want to have fresh data. Caching helps us to deal with this server that will build actually every time there is a request your application and deliver it. Instead of dealing with every request and every time building the app, what we can do is to cache our application. And of course, this hybrid rendering is possible because of Nitro, the new server engine that powers Nuxt 3. So please refer to Nitro to know more about caching. And we can continue on the route rules. Because previously, every route page of Nuxt and server must use the same rendering mode, client-side and universal. Now when hybrid, we can specify on the route what we want to use. Using route rules, you can define rules for a group of Nuxt route, change rendering mode, and assign a cache strategy based on route. So down there we've got an example with define nuxt config, so you understood that it happens there in our nuxt.config.ts. So what I can do instead of having this SSR true is to have a route rule entry. And in this route rule entry, which is an object, I can specify the name of the route, the URL of the route, which is related there on a page. And I can specify if I want to use server-side rendering or not, if I want to use some header, for instance, or if I want to have just static. And I can also work on headers with redirect and status code and etc. etc. So with these route rules, we can specify with these options, okay, we can specify which type of rendering we want to use. And that's the new thing with Nuxt 3, this hybrid possibility that we didn't get before. We had to put on the entire application that we want to use SSR or just static. Now we can use both. When we go on the official documentation, we can see that Nuxt provides useFetch, useLazyFetch, useAsync data, and useLazyAsync data. So we are going to start by useFetch, and what we're going to do at first is to go on our project, and on nuxt.config.ts, I'm going to put my SSR mode on false, so like an SPA or a static website. All right. So now I'm back, and now my application is not declared as a server-side rendering mode for now. So by default, Nuxt 3 is on SSR, but we just remove this SSR mode. So everything is happening client-side for now. And we are going to start with useFetch. Within your page, components and plugin can use useFetch to universally fetch from any URL. Universally, it means on the server side or on the client side. This composable provides a convenient wrapper around useAsync data and fetch. So that's very nice to see. However, what is async data? We are going to see it after. And what is fetch? Well, it's actually $fetch, because we know that with Node.js we have this method fetch that helps us to fetch some data. And actually it's also available in JavaScript regularly. So we have this $fetch. And if we go on the API side documentation of Nuxt, we can see that the definition of useFetch is these composables provide a convenient wrapper, exactly what we read, around async data and fetch, $fetch. So it's a combination between useAsync data and fetch. And if I click on $fetch, we see that $fetch is actually a function that is globally exposed, and that function comes from a library called ofetch. And when I click on ofetch, I arrive on a repository. and it's called a better fetch API, works on Node, browsers, and workers. So this fetch here is available on three sides: Node, browser, and workers. And it comes from, of course, NGS, the unified JavaScript tools that we talked about before. So useFetch automatically generate a key based on URL and fetch options, provide type hints for request URL based on server routes, and infer API response type. And down there, we've got an example. So we see that at first, our useFetch method can be destructured, and it can be destructured in different types, and we can look at this type down there. We've got data, which maybe will be the response, and of course it will be the response, but we got also pending, and pending can be a loading state that will be very useful. We got also refresh, which means that actually later we will get a function called refresh that when we click on it will refresh the call and the data. We've got execute, and we got also error to actually display the error. And as options in our fetch, we've got a lot of other elements, but we are going to come back at it just after. What I need to do for myself is just to fetch from an API, and actually, which is cool with Nuxt, is that we can create a server side. So what we got here is a server folder, and inside I got a products root, which is available at localhost/API/products. And I got this JSON, and you understood now that this root products will distribute my JSON array. So back in my products.ts, what I can do is just to import my data, and when I call this endpoint, it will return to me the data from my JSON. So I'm going to get back, I'm going to update, and there what I'm going to do, I'm going to go on localhost/API/products, and there we go. We've got our data there. So the thing is that now on my index, what I want to do is to just fetch this endpoint. So what I'm going to do is simply to put const data, and like it would be a response. Actually, I'm destructuring here my response. I'm going to type useFetch, and here it's going to be API/products. And what I want to do, I want to console log this data. There we go. Let's get back, let's update, and we see suddenly that we have actually a reference. And which is cool is that immediately the data that is coming from my API has been turned into a reference value. So what we need to do is to type data.value because there is some value there. And there we go. We see that we've got our data with our array. However, it's still a proxy. So that's a bit a problem. What I would need to do is first, I'm not going to call it data, however, I'm going to call it products. And what I would need to do is actually to transform to row if I want to access into my JavaScript to the data, this products.value. There we go. I update, and suddenly, there we go. I got my 10 products available, which is amazing. That was for the JavaScript part. However, if I want to put it into my template, I would put products there. And what's going to happen there? Amazing. What's happening is that we've got our products displayed there. And here, the most interesting part of useFetch is that right now I got this data there. So I can put as an option here, I can put as an option a method called transform. With transform, I can say that I want to change the model that is returned to my view. What I'm going to do is to open an object just after my call here. And of course, later you may need to put some kind of headers or anything else. You can do it there. All the keys that you need to find are in the API docs. And here we see that we got many keys such as key, method, query, params, header, lazy, immediate, watch. Anyway, what we want is to use transform. And with transform, what I'm going to do is to access to my products. And here, what I want to return is actually products.data because I got this data which give me the array, and what I want to have immediately is just the array and not this data in front of it. So you see, you can use transform to get it. Now, if I go to my nuxt.config.ts and I remove this SSR false and I pass to SSR true, so now I'm on server-side rendering, what happens is that nothing is happening. Because remember, useFetch can be used on SSR true or SSR false. So if you are doing client-side, it will work. If you are doing server-side rendering, it will work also, and you won't see the difference at all. And what we want to do now, we want to use this loading pending actually that is available there, which is a boolean. So if I get back to the useFetch documentation, we see that I got this pending, which is a boolean. And what I would like to do is to display actually a loader while I'm waiting for an asynchronous call. So what we would like to use is another function which is called useLazyFetch. Because useFetch is freezing your application until the moment it receives the data, and then it renders the data. With useLazyFetch, we want to display a loader, so display the application immediately and display a loader instead. So it means that here in my data, what I need to do is actually to return a promise. So here it's going to be an asynchronous call. And what I want to do is to return a new promise the old way. Okay, and then here I will have a resolve and reject. I'm just going to use resolve, I will not reject. And there I'm going to actually put a set timeout function, and this set timeout function will answer after 2000 milliseconds. And what's going to happen is that I'm going to resolve, and what I'm going to resolve is my data. Okay, so I'm going to save this, and back in my application, what I'm going to do, I'm going to say, hey, if it is pending, I want to have loading, otherwise I want to have the products. All right, so we have a function which is called useLazyFetch, which is a useFetch, but that is not freezing our application. And on the products endpoint, we have a promise, so we're going to wait for some time, actually 2000 milliseconds, so 2 seconds to render our app. So let's try. I'm going to update, and what's happening is that we have a loading during 2000 milliseconds, and we have then the array that is displayed, which is very cool because most of the time with this useLazyFetch, we would like to have some kind of skeleton waiting for the app, and it's working very well. Let's talk now about useAsync data. Within our page, components and plugins can use useAsync data to get access to data that resolve asynchronously. And we have a definition about the difference between useFetch and useAsync data. useFetch receives the URL and gets that data, whereas useAsync data might have more complex logic. useFetch URL is equivalent to useAsync URL fetch URL. It's developer experience sugar for most common use case. And down there, we've got an example of actually this useAsync data, which actually is fetching an endpoint with a counter their example and this useAsync with this time a key and not a URL, and a function which calls actually $fetch, and it returns a promise, and it's using the callback that you will put in it. So there we've got this fetch which is there, and we've got this useAsync data. So the best thing is to put an example. In my endpoint, I'm going to create a new function which actually will wait for a promise on a product count. So we've got a product count value up there, and after 2 milliseconds, so 2 seconds, we are going to actually increment this product count, and finally we are going to return this product count. So when we are going to call this /API/product, we will wait for 2000 milliseconds, so we will need on the index.view to wait for that call, so it would be asynchronous. And finally, we will return our product count. So back in my index.view, what I will need to do is to use async data on a key, which could be product. And there, what we will need to do is to open this function, and this is our callback. We will have the answer of this fetch, and this is this fetch that is going to make the call. And remember, this promise will be returned, and then we will get the data, and we will have our pending there. So I'm going to get back, I'm going to update, and what we see is that there we go, we've got our product count, but there was no pending. Now I know that my server is running and that there is this, actually every time I fetch this incremental function, what I can do is here using a function to refresh my call. So what I'm going to do actually is to declare in my template a button, and this button will trigger a function that will be called refresh. And this refresh function will use another function provided by Nuxt, which is refresh Nuxt data. And here, this is where I'm going to use the key of my function. So I got products, which is there. So I get back, and when I click, we see that I got finally my loading because it's already rendered. And every time I refresh, it's incrementing my product count. Okay, so now I'm going to use actually use lazy async data, and it's the same thing as use lazy fetch, sorry. If instead of having an incremental function, we would have a set interval that would be actually triggered every second. Now what I have is this use lazy async. However, I don't have any asynchronous actions there, so what I can be back is on use async data. And when I get back and I click on refresh, we see that it's been 33. Actually, I said product count, but it's actually seconds. I got 36 seconds, 42 seconds that my server has been running because it's already turning there, and we've got this product count incremental every second. We saw that Nuxt 3 is providing to us several methods to fetch data. The first method is useFetch, and actually useFetch, which is a composable, help us to fetch data universally, so on front side and on the backend side. And we can fetch that from any URL. And actually, useFetch is a combination between asynchronous call, which can be used with the composable use async data, and $fetch, which is coming from the method ofetch from the library and the organization of NGS. We also saw that we got many other options that we can pass on our fetching composables provided by Nuxt, and this function can help us to watch some elements, to refresh or to put some headers, some keys, method, queries, and params. Also, Nuxt 3 is working with cache, and we've got a function called clear Nuxt data that helps us to clear the cache data that we fetch, because when we use with async data the key, we got some cache that can imply some data that will be not fresh. To refresh the data, you can use the clear Nuxt data function. The common problem is to pass the client headers to your API, and there is a method provided by Nuxt which is use request header, and we see here that we can pass directly the headers on useFetch. If you have a front-end application, you might want to work on the SEO. The search engine optimization is going to help you to be found on Google. And of course, with Nuxt 3, we got everything we need to index every page with the right SEO metas that we can put inside a built-in composable that is available, which is useHead. On the official documentation, we see that we got several options to set the SEO metas of our app. And the first one is to go on our nuxt.config.ts. So we can read providing an app.head property in your nuxt.config.ts allows you to customize the head for your entire app. This method does not allow you to provide reactive data. If you need global reactive data, you can use useHead in app.vue. So if we go here on the nuxt.config.js, the first thing that we can do is to open an app object actually. And inside we can put a head, okay? So here this head is going to be everywhere in every page of your app. So if you have several pages later there, it will take the head from here and put it everywhere. So let's get an example. So I'm going to put title, a Nuxt course on YouTube, whatever. I'm going to save this, look at my server, so it's running again. And then I come back, and what we see up there is that I got Nuxt course on YouTube that is inserted here. If I inspect and I open my head, we can see that suddenly I got my title. So let's continue. Let's say that there I'm gonna have some kind of description. This is a repository for a course about Nuxt free for YouTube. So here we see that description is not available, of course, because you got to stick to the model of the head object. So when I go on here, what I can see is that on app, I can specify many things, and I can specify head. Later, we will see the whole configuration, but for now, let's just stick to this SEO thing. So I got my head, and we see that actually what I'm trying to put is a meta. So this description is supposed to be a meta, and what I can do is to open this meta. Meta is actually an array, and inside we're going to put some objects. And these objects here will get name, content, a lot of stuff. So the meta that I want to put, actually, it's actually content. And here, this is where my description should be. So I'm going to put name, and then I'm going to put description. There we go, he understood. So I'm going to save. Now I'm going to get back. I'm going to update. And I'm going to open my head, and I will see if I will get my description. Okay, I got my description, which is available there. So when we look at actually the documentation, we can see that we can add also link, style, script, no script, and finally we will find something like this, and we will get all the SEO provided by default on the nuxt.config.ts. If you got an app where you don't want to put some SEO on pages and just get a general SEO for the whole application, you should use this method, go on nuxt.config.ts. However, if you don't get this, let's remove it and let's doing it page by page. So I'm going to get back to the first page, which is index there, and I'm going to get back also to the documentation there. So when I get down, and here I had an example that I could use. Again, we already saw that we can put everything on head. I can also use page by page this useHead composable. The useHead composable function allows you to manage your head tags in a programmatic and reactive way, powered by VueUse head. VueUse, again, we saw it before. It's a combination actually of many composables that we can use in a library, in the library VueUse. So what I want to do, I'm going to do exactly the same, and if we look at this object inside useHead, we can see that it looks exactly the same as in nuxt.config.ts. So I'm going to get up there, I'm going to open a script as setup, and the thing you should not miss there is that you want to say that you are going to use TS, okay, as a lang. So I'm going to use TypeScript. So let's use this composable. I'm going to type useHead, and inside there, I'm going to put everything that I need. So just going to copy paste actually this example. So here I'm going to have a title, and I'm going to put this is my home page for Nuxt course, and I'm going to put as a description page where you are going to find everything about this course of Nuxt, or okay. Then I could put some body attributes. Then I could put some scripts or links or whatever. All right, this is done. I have complete my metas on my useHead, and every time I'm going to go to index, I'm going to find in the head, actually, all the content that I have added. So this course is not really about SEO, but it's just a good way here that I'm showing you to add some SEO on a specific page. We would catch this ID with the use root composables available by VueFree, and we would catch actually the param of this product ID, and then we would inject this product ID directly inside our title, for example. Right now, I'm on the index.vue page. If I go on the profile.vue page, actually, I would like to change the SEO. So again, I'm going to open a script setup lang.ts, and I'm going to do exactly the same. I'm just going to use add there, and I'm going to write my SEO. And there I'm going to write my SEO concerning my page. So here I'm going to have a title, which will be profile page. Okay, now here I'm on index, and if I go on /profile, we see that my SEO metas have changed, of course. So you could work on every page you would like to put SEO on. And of course, if you would not have some SEO, you could provide it here inside the useHead object. And another thing is that, I don't know if you noticed, but in the previous example, we had this script, so you could add as a script there, directly with the useHead, thanks to the useHead, the script you would like to launch. So right now we've got a console log hello world. So when I come back to this index page, we see that I got my hello world that has been triggered here. This is a good way when you want to call a CDN on a specific page, instead of putting the CDN link here in nuxt.config.ts. There is another way to deal with SEO. It's by components. Nuxt provides title, base, no script, style, meta, links, body, all those built-in components that we can interact directly with your metadata within your component template. So let's have a look there. We see that we got just a specific template there. And we've got a head component with title just down there. So I'm going to get back in my index, and I'm going to remove all of this. And what I'm going to do is inside my home page, I'm going to use this head that I got there. And I'm going to use the title built-in component. So this is my title. For any reason, you would like to have this component there. So when I get back and just I update, there we go, we see that I have this is my title. And if we continue, we can see that I can add some description and some style also. So in my case, it's useless because I already got Tailwind, but I could have a dynamic title. So I'm going to add my dynamic title. And here, this is my dynamic title. Of course, if it would be a dynamic title, it would be under a ref. So I'm going to get back. And look at that, I got this is my dynamic title, and we saw that the background was suddenly green. However, this body green here has been removed by my Tailwind. So we could add some style, we could have some many other elements related to the built-in components provided by Nuxt. As I said to you before, you could have some dynamic data, and here we've got an example with the reactivity. Reactivity is supported on all properties as computed getters, ref and reactive. There we've got the example. We could inject the title that we got there inside our user head. Of course, if you want to use third-party scripts, you can also inject the scripts as we saw in the user head before. And you can say with the body true that you want them to appear at the end of your body and not specifically into the template. Remember when we talked about the layout, we saw that by page we could put the layout we would like, and we use define page meta, the built-in composable, which is available everywhere in my Nuxt application. And here we see that we can also define the SEO through the define page meta. So what is the difference between use head and define page meta? Well, the documentation doesn't explain very well what's the difference between define page meta and use head, but I guess that if you really want to work on SEO, you would use head, and define page meta would be for more less specific data that you would put into your metas. The lifecycle hooks, what is it? Nuxt provides a powerful hooking system to expand almost every aspect using hooks. This feature is powered by NGS Hookable. These hooks are available for Nuxt module and build context. Here we got the example with close. However, if you want to have the list of all the hooks, you can go there in the API documentation at Advanced, and then you can click here on Lifecycle hooks. And suddenly we've got the list of every hook that we can use with a description. And it's also telling us the environment we can use, because sometimes it can be server, sometimes it can be client, etc., etc. The other way is to go here inside your nuxt.config.ts, and you can click on the hook, and suddenly we can look at the interface of the Nuxt hook. And down there we've got a list actually, which is exactly the same. And we see that we've got build before, pages, extend, imports, etc., etc. We've got a lot of hooks when we can trigger some operations. So I'm going to pick up a status ready because it's in the list. And instead of having this Nuxt that I'm going to catch, I'm going to just console log the context, because I guess that I got my context already available there. I'm going to stop and restart, and I'm supposed to have my context that is console log, and we can see it there. So sometimes you would like to create some hooks at certain moments, and you would like to trigger some operation for any reason. Well, you can use actually all those hooks that are available there, and be safe, because some hooks, they are triggered in some environment. Some can be server and client, some can be only server, some can be only clients. Another thing that we could do is to use those life cycles inside a plugin. So here we've got an example of a plugin that would be triggered every time there is a page start. So I'm going to copy paste this. I'm just going to remove this hook that I have there, and I'm going to go on my plugin, and I got a plugin.ts that comes back from a previous core. And here to my context, I would add a new hook on app created, and I would like to console log from plugin. And what we see that I already got hello from plugin, and here I got hello from plugin too. I could add some hooks from some plugins when I would like to trigger some operation at certain step of the initialization of my. Another subject that we are not going to treat here, because it's related to Nuxt but not directly, is the usage of NuxtKit. NuxtKit is the library that helps you to create modules. And if you would like to create a module, also, you could loop through the Nuxt context and add your own hook inside the module that you would like to create. In terms of configuration, Nuxt gives us access to a config file at the root of our application. In this config file, we can configure the whole project, but we can also actually add some modules, we can add some CSS paths, or we can add some specific configuration related to the module we add. Previously, we looked at the nuxt.config.ts, and we've worked on the CSS paths, on the modules, and we added, for instance, post-CSS with a config here file. For instance, I can give you a first example. On our project right now, we've got Tailwind CSS. So basically with the module of Tailwind that I didn't use actually, what I could do is, instead of having this tailwind.config.js, I could grab actually this whole object there and add it here in Tailwind CSS directly here. That's the purpose of this nuxt.config.ts. The idea is that when you are going to inject a module to your application, later you will add some configuration file from another library. Well, the idea is to never have this config file except the nuxt.config.ts, which here plays the role actually to the place of the whole configuration of your project. What I just said concerns only the modules. However, we have some other configuration that we can add to our project. So if we look at the documentation, we see that in this define nuxt config, which is a method provided by Nuxt, natively. We can inject this big object, and in this big object there will be the whole configuration. Okay, so when we look at it, we have a lot of options, and which is interesting is that we can access this config also, this runtime config. We can access it inside our DOM by just using this inside our view. Then later we've got a lot of configuration, and again this app config is available. And yeah, if we want to look deeper at it, you can go on Get Started Configuration. But for me now, what I want to do is to show you most of the options that are available actually in this configuration file. During this presentation, we are not going to pass on every configuration key that you can add. It will be useless. I'm just going to talk about those that are the most useful in my opinion. Previously, we already worked on some alias, and especially on the assets folder. So instead of having a very long path that you will write by yourself with points and slash, you can use those aliases. And here you get the options that says that actually you can access through the specific folder that you want with the related path. So instead of having slash and the root dir, we would add at, for instance, or we would add assets / name of the image.png. So that's a very useful config that you can add. Then we have the app object. You have the base URL if you want to change the base URL of your application. You have the build assets dir. So basically when you build your application, you have by default this underscore Nuxt, okay, the folder name for the build seed assets relative to base URL. You can change it with build assets dir. You got the CDN URL, an absolute URL to serve the public folder from production only. So basically here, if you would like to change, you would type directly CDN URL blah 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 immediately, okay. You got the head that we already saw in the course on SEO that helps you to define the SEO for the global application, which can be actually here a problem because sometimes you want to have different SEO data or metas inside every page. Keep alive, that can be disabled. Keep alive, again, it's when you want to keep alive a component with its data instead of just destroying it inside your app. You got the layout transition. We didn't see the transition, however, you imagine that irritating from Vue with Nuxt, you can do some transition. You can turn on false or true your layout transition. Same for the page transition. You can change the root ID, and here we see that on my div I got underscore Nuxt. If I want to change this ID, I can do it with the root ID. So basically I would go there and say that for now the root ID would be Guillaume for instance. There's also the build dir option that helps you to change actually the name of the build directory that you will have. So here we got .nuxt there, and this is the build of your application. It's actually what is delivering your application. There, if you want to change the name, you can type build dir and it will create a folder with a new name instead of .nuxt. You got the debug option, which is clearly cool because it logs out when you get a problem or not. It prints out aux names, timing on the server, logs, everything that is related to the Nuxt app. If you want to turn it off, you can go on your app and just type here debug false, and then you will not have the console log in your console. Then you got the dev server option. If you want to improve your developer experience and change, for instance, the host, the HTTP, the port, the URL, you can do that in the dev server object. Inside, you just enter those keys and you change them. If you want to customize all the architecture of your project and change the name of the folder for any reason, you can use also dir. And inside dir, you can specify where you want assets to be. So change the name of assets, the name of layout, middleware, pages, plugin, public, and static. It can happen to you that you have extensions that are not resolved by Nuxt, and you have to specify them inside your nuxt.config.ts. So for instance, there we've got this extension array, and we've got some .gs file, .gs6, .mgs, .ts, .ts6, .vue. or maybe we could have some GQL if you do some GraphQL, you would have to declare them inside your nuxt.config.ts. So especially there, what I would do is here, for instance, to say extensions, which would be an array, and it says CSS, but actually it's not CSS. It would be like GraphQL, or it would be .gql, for instance. And then my Nuxt application would resolve these files with this extension. Previously, we already saw the modules, so you can add a module entrance and add your modules there. You can also use the root dir option that helps you to define where is your Nuxt application and where Nuxt has to look at when it's building your app. If you want to work on the configuration of Vite, you can also doing it in nuxt.config.ts. There is a Vite entrance that gives you all the access that you need, for instance, to the ES build configuration, the public directory, the resolve, the root, the server, or the option related to Vue. And finally, there is a big set of options to configure Webpack. Because if you are already a front-end developer, you know that with Webpack, you will have some configuration that you would do through a webpack.config.ts file. Here, of course, you can do it through next.config.ts. One of the most interesting modules provided by the Nuxt community is Nuxt content. Why? Let me give you an example. Sometimes you are creating websites, and on those websites there's only static content. This static content is just written directly in raw on your HTML. Well, and you don't need necessarily to create some JavaScript interaction and stuff. You just want to put some static content such as text, videos, or images, whatever. For that, what you would do is just to create an app and write in HTML your title, your paragraph and stuff. However, one of the most interesting thing is that you could write this content in Markdown. And writing it in Markdown would be easier than writing a whole application in HTML, CSS, and to set it up, etc., etc. Nuxt content is providing an amazing solution for that kind of problem. Most of the websites that are written to be documentations are static content. Let's take an example. Here we've got this Nuxt content website on content.nuxtjs.org. And this website is just static content. There's only text written down there. So what we would like to do is not to write HTML, but instead to write Markdown. And maybe sometimes we would like just to write JSON to display some website. We can do that with Nuxt content. With the module Nuxt content, we just need to add a folder called content, and Nuxt is going to watch our folder and translate our Markdown files into HTML pages. It will even do the routing between the pages, and you will be able to change from a page to another one just by creating the file. You will not need to register any route. You will not need to do anything. It will work really easy. So what I propose to you is to create a content, actually a content website, a static website with Nuxt content. So I'm going to click on Get Started. And down there, here I got a command npx nuxi init content app. So I'm going to copy paste this, get back, and I'm going to enter in my folder. There we go. And here it's going to create for me a content application. It's a Nuxt application. So everything that you've learned inside this course will be available inside this app. So I'm going to enter into it. Once I'm into my project, what I can see again is that it's a very, very light project. There's only an app.vue with a Nuxt page at the root. I got a page component with a slug, and I got this content doc. Content doc is just the routing system of Nuxt content, a built-in component provided by Nuxt content that display all the pages that will be in content. And if I look in my package.json, what I can see is that as dev dependencies, I got Nuxt content, and I got this folder called content, and inside I have Markdown files. I have about, I got index, and just let's run our project. And that's it. We have our website running, Nuxt content, and it says this page corresponds to the /root of your website, blah, blah, blah. And these two pages are rendered by the pages slug.vue. So here we see that we've got a slug and we've got our index. So I'm going to try to go on /about to see, and there we go. I got this about page. And actually this about page is coming from here. So here I can write in Markdown. So to write in Markdown, the syntax is really simple. You can find a lot of websites that will teaches you how to write in Markdown. You may know already Markdown because you already wrote some README by the past. But here I can write content. Okay, so I'm going to save this, and as you see, immediately it's rendered. So why would we do that instead of creating HTML pages? Well, the thing is that if you are working on your SEO, it can be very useful to create a website this way, because the content here will be rendered immediately because it's just static content and there will be no JavaScript that will run inside your website. So for SEO purpose, it's amazing to use Nuxt content. Also, if you want to write some kind of documentation or some kind of blog, you would use that because it's easier to write here some content and to use the syntax, for instance, title syntax of Markdown. There we go. As you see, you could be way faster by writing here in MD file instead of working in an HTML file. Let's create a new page. Let's say that we're gonna have some kind of new file called profile.md, and here I would like, this is my profile. Hello, my name is Guillaume. Okay, I'm going to save this, and now I'm going to go to a slash in profile, and I type enter, and immediately my root has been created. So of course, this Markdown is really limited. You cannot do any JavaScript or very complicated stuff into it. It's not made to create web application, really. It's more to create some content. So another thing is that right now, my website is totally empty. I would like to put some style. I would like to create actually some design, you know. I would like to have some colors, I would like to add some style, etc, etc. Well, what we could do is going back to the nuxt.com documentation and go to the modules, and what we could do, we could add Tailwind as a module instead of adding it directly from the Tailwind documentation. What I'm going to do is to install this Tailwind module. So I'm going to stop and I'm going to install Tailwind as a module. Then I will need to add it to my modules there. So I'm going to go to my Nuxt config. And actually Nuxt content is working exactly like any other module. As you see, here we've got Nuxt content that has been added and we've got Tailwind CSS. So you can either create a Nuxt content application through this Nuxt content npx init, or you can still add Nuxt content to your existing project. Okay, so I've done this. So now I'm supposed to have Tailwind CSS installed. So now I'm going to type yarn dev. There we go. And if I get back to my app, I should have Tailwind CSS that is applied. And there we go. So now I got Tailwind CSS. What I can do is actually to inspect, okay, my markdown file that has been transformed as an HTML. And we see that here I got an H1, I got a paragraph, etc, etc. So what I can do is to create my own design system. I can right click there, create a new folder. I'm going to create an assets. And in this, I'm going to create a main.scss. So what I would do is to stop my server and to type npm install sass. And what I would do actually is just to type yarn dev, and I will add my sass here file to my CSS inside my nuxt.config.ts. So I'm going to type @assets main.scss, and I would save that. Here what I would do is to import from Tailwind my base, and I would target my layer base, which is actually the basic layer that I'm using with Tailwind on my application. And what I would do, I would say, hey, I want that my H1 would be apply text red 500. That's a color from Tailwind. So when I get back, we see suddenly that I got my title there, and exactly it would do the same on every page. Okay, so what I could do also is just to put all this content so I can get back to my slug, and here on the main I could say that I want to put a container mx auto there. So I would save, there we go. And what I could do also, I could add some margin on the top and on the bottom with my4. And there we go. So as you see, now I can create my own style sheet, my own design system, and then apply it to my content everywhere in my application. Again, for the routing, what I can do is just to use the markdown. So here on about, we see that I got a link. Let's go on index and let's just remove this. Let's say home. And let's say that I want to have a link that would say go to profile in with time / profile. There we go. And I want to style my link. So I'm going to go here and say that all links will have, for instance, a color. So text till, yes, let's say till 600 and underline, whatever. I'm going to save that. And there we go. And when I click, I can go to the page I want with the routing system. If you want to know more about Nuxt content, you can go on the documentation. You can do that with Markdown, with MDC syntax. You can also work with JSON. As you see here, you can apply some JSON. What you would do is work on YAML also. And you can work also on the displaying, on the rendering. If you have some questions about some stuff that you would do, you can go here and look at rendering, querying, navigation, etc. Everything is provided. A last thing, if you want to add some SEO to your page, because now we are working with Markdown, what you can do is at the top of your file, you can specify, for instance, the title of your page. So this is my Nuxt content main page, whatever. And when you get back here, we see on the top that I got this is my Nuxt content main page. So if you want to work on some metas, you can add them here on the top. And which is cool also with Nuxt content, it's that it's really easy to deploy. It's really fast because it's just static content that will be built and rendered. We saw that with Nuxt content, we can create static website, and we can, of course, if we want, create some documentation. For this practical exercise that I propose you to end my course on Nuxt, what I would like to do is to create some kind of fake API that we would request, and next to it I would like to create a fake documentation, okay? So to do that, I can do entirely all these steps inside Nuxt free because I can create my API with server, but of course I can also create my documentation with Nuxt content. However, when we start a Nuxt content project, it's empty. There is no styling, there's nothing to do. You have to build your own style. And actually, with Nuxt, what we can do, we can add our own themes. And our themes can be used to give some style to a website. If you look online, you will find some themes. And actually, we have one. And this one is used to make the website of Nuxt content. This theme is creating all this styling there. And all this website, if we look at it quickly, we will find that this website is using the theme called Docus. Docus, that you can find at docus.dev, it's actually a theme for Nuxt that helps you to just install a documentation website, a simple one, this way. So it's really simple to use actually. But the thing is that you will have a documentation with a sidebar and everything already set up. So you will win a lot of time. I'm going to start by installing this theme as a new application. At this point, you should use a specific version of Node and if possible, the version 16. So I'm going to look by typing npm nvmls, and I'm going to use the 16.17.1 because the 18, there might be some bugs. So here I'm going to say nvm use 16 17.1. There we go. And now what I'm going to do, I'm just going to copy paste this to create my project. And there we go. We got our docus that has been initialized. And if we take a look at it a little bit, we can see that it's a bit different. We've got some TS file, renovate.json. There's a bit of different configuration here, but actually it's still using Nuxt free with, we can see on the dev dependencies, the Nuxt team docus. So here we've got our content. What we're going to do, we are going to launch it right away. So I'm going to type yarn and yarn dev. I got an empty documentation that is available with some specification. I can turn it to light and dark. And I got this get started and it's totally empty. And we can start writing our fake documentation there. So if I get back to the project, I got my Nuxt folder with this guide. I got YAML. I got an index, which is actually the basic of my page. And then I got a folder, and with the folder numbers to specify for my sidebar on which side are going to be the documentation. Okay, so what we could do at first is just to start with our fake API. So here I'm going to call it actually fake countries API. Okay, API, there we go, documentation. So here on the title here, it's for the meta actually of your project. So I can go down and put fake countries there. So here it's markdown again, but we see it's a bit different. It's that we've got a CTA button where we can put the get started code there, and there's the link to go to the guide or the button, secondary button. Then also on our snippet, we can put actually some code if we would like to have some code. So here I'm going to write API to fetch any country in the world with its name, its ID code, and more informations. Okay, so I'm going to save this, and there we go, I got my title there. So now what is our API doing? Well, actually what we would like to do is to have some endpoints. So what I'm going to start to do is to create a new folder called server, and in there I'm going to create a subfolder called API because I want to put API as a prefix. And in there, let's say that I would like to have a first endpoint called random, and it will be a random endpoint, an endpoint for random countries. So I'm going to create my endpoint, so export default, which would be a function, and I'm going to return a success true to try this endpoint at first. So I'm going to get back, and then I'm going to type /API/random. And there we go. Okay, my endpoint is working. That's great. Now what I want to do, I want to have some data that I would use to actually to display my country or to answer by my country. And I found this amazing library by Dubco called countries. So I'm going to install it. So I'm going to stop actually my server, and I'm going to type yarn_had at Dubco, that's the person who made it, thank you very much, /countries. So I'm going to type enter, and it's going to install for me this library. There we go. So I'm going to start again, and there we go. And what I can do actually is to import the countries or the country list from the library. So I'm going to get at the top there. There we go. And I think country list should be an array. So for that, I'm going just to console country list at first. And let's look at it. There we go. Yeah, there we go. That's what I thought. We've got an array with some countries there. I want that endpoint to be a get. So I'm going to type random.get. Okay. And it's going to change. Okay, that's right. And what I want to answer is actually a random country. So I'm going to type random country as an answer, and it's going to be country lists. And inside the country list is going to be a mat random, exactly, country list dot length. And there we go. So let's get back and let's try actually our endpoint again. And when I type enter, there we go, I got Gibraltar. If I type again Island, if I type again Puerto Rico, etc., etc. Okay, that's cool, it's working. What I could do now is actually to just create the documentation about this endpoint. So I got API/random. So what I can do is getting back on my fake countries API. I'm going to click on get started. And what I'm going to do at first is not to remove this get started because I want to keep it. But actually I'm going to create a, in the guide section, I'm going to, maybe what can I do is to create a second folder called endpoints. All right. And if we save, nothing is happening here because what I need to do is to create a dir.yaml at the root. And I'm going to use this as an example. So I'm going to copy paste this title guide and I need to put a title. So here, API, let's call it API. All right, so I'm going to save. Okay, nothing happens because I need to put actually my 0.index.md. And this one, let's take the same example as we got there. I'm going to save, and there we go. As you see, I got my page that appeared there. And that, which is cool, is that we can see that there is a navigation that is automated between the pages. So API, and this one, it's called Get Started. Let's try to change the title there. So I'm going to remove this. And let's say get a random country. And we see now that my title is now appearing on my sidebar. So I'm going to get back and I'm going to type some documentation about it. So here it's again markdown, so you can write whatever you want. Endpoint to get a random country on our countries list. Okay, so what we could do also is to type some code that we could put. Here what I can put is method get, and down there I could put /API/random, and I'm going to save. And as we see, there we go, we've got our random that is here, endpoint to get a random country on our country list. If you want to know more about creating endpoints with Nitro, you can go on the official documentation of nitro.ngs.io. Nitro can exist by himself also. Right now we are using it in Nuxt 3, but you can also create regular endpoints with Nitro. So what we're going to do now, we are going to create a new endpoint where we're going to post actually a request with a string, and we want to find in our array of countries the specific country. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to get back to my app. And in the API folder, I'm going to create a new folder called countries. And there I'm going to create a new endpoint called find.post.ts. Find would be just the endpoint, so it will be actually API/countries/find, okay? And this endpoint will be a method post. All right, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to use the example of Nitro, and it's exactly the same as the random one. The difference is that I didn't use the event handler here function. It's exactly the same, but whatever. Okay, so now we return user profile. It's going to be an object, what we will return at the end. And what we want to do actually is to use the country list that we had before. So I'm going to come back on this and I'm going to import actually my country list, and there we go. So what I want to do is to post as a body. Actually, I'm going to post an object with inside, and there will be we can call that country, okay? And country will be a string. Okay, so I'm just making those notes for this course, and don't take them as a good practice. Most of the time you have better way to write comments in API. This course is not about backend either on API, it's just to show you the example. So it will be a string, country will be a string, and we will catch it through this event. So what we're going to do is to create a variable called body, and we want to await for a function, a native function of Nitro. And this native function is readBody. ReadBody, we pass the event to it, and it's going to return for us directly our body as an object, which is very cool. So we will get our country up there. So once I got the country, I can destructure country from the body. And here what I can do is to return the countries that we will find with this string. So for instance, here, if I'm going to type France, it's going to return to me here an array with countries that correspond to France. So there's two things that I need to do. I need to look at how country lists are looking at. And here I got to return countries. It's not specifically one country. It's not find one country. It may be several countries, because we will see that our string will match the letters. And in there, what I'm going to do, I think I already know, but I'm going just to put true for now. And I'm going to look at the list. And there we go. I want to match the label. Okay, I want to match the label with country. So if it's going to be Ghana in my country here, I want to match the label in my array. So I'm going to do country list, simple JavaScript. Then I'm going to filter. And what I want to do is that here I got an object. And in this object, I want to match my object.label that we just saw. And I just want to know if it's going to include actually country. All right. So we can save this. I'm going to remove that. And now I need to post to this endpoint to know if I get some response. To do that, I'm using actually Rapid API. Rapid API help you to create some, actually it's Postman inside your IDE, and here especially it's Visual Studio Code. So here I need to create a new call, and this new call actually will be my post. So I'm going to go there. I'm going to post to what? I'm going to post to actually http localhost 3000 /API/countries, and here it's find. Okay, so I'm going to click on JSON, and here I'm going to pass my country. Okay, and let's say that we are going to type France. Okay, and when I type send, there we go. We see that I have my country that have been found on my endpoint, which is API/countries/find. Okay, now let's say that I want to remove some letters on my country down there. Let's say that I want just to type FRA. It's still going to find France, because on my endpoint, I'm just filtering on includes the strings, and I'm looking at labels. So I'm going to get back. And if I remove some letters, I got more countries that start actually with French, French Guiana, France, French Polynesia, French Southern, etc., etc. Now, if I type an A, I'm going to get back and I'm going to click on send. Here I got several countries. So these several countries are Algeria, American Samoa, Andorra, Angola, Anguilla, etc., etc. You're not obliged to use Rapid API for this course. You can use, for instance, Postman. It's better. But for me, I got this in my VS Code. It's faster. Now I have created my endpoint. What I want to do, I want to put the documentation to use it. So I'm going to get back there in my index. And what I can write here, it's find a country by label. And actually it's going to be exactly the same. Find a country by label on our list. It's going to be a post. And this time it's going to be countries/find. And if I save and I get back, I update, we see that there's a problem because I got my index and it doesn't put here find a country by label. So what I need to do is actually to create another page. What I need to do if I want to separate the two files, I can create another markdown file, 1.find.md for instance, and I arrive there with my explanation, and there we go. We see that I got get a random country, find a country by label, and there we go. Of course, this presentation is not very well. I should work more on the design, on what I want to do. So here we see that we can copy paste the code, which is amazing. However, we've got this method get on the top. It should not be here. So I'm going to remove this and I got my endpoint. Okay, and I'm going to put just endpoint there. So it makes me think that I have to change my my description up there. And what I could do is, instead of putting this, what I could put is my method get there, okay? So I would have method get as a reference up there. Of course, I'm not a big boss in Markdown. I'm sure you got a lot of ways of doing nicer stuff, but that should be enough. So I got my endpoint, okay, here, and actually I can remove endpoint. And what I would like to have is a response example. So I'm going to take this, and remember on my API/random, I have a response. So what I can do is just to type /API/random, looking at a response, and I'm just going to copy paste this as an example. So I'm going to get back, and I'm going to update, okay? And here in my response, I'm going to put my fake response, and there we go. That's an example of a good documentation we could do. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to copy paste actually the same model. So I'm going to get back on find, and instead of having this method on the top, I would put method post, okay? And I would put, for instance, a response example down there. And actually I can take back this. I'm going to go there. And the response that I got, so let's get back on my API call, which I got here. Here, exactly. Here I got a response, and I'm going to put France. I'm going to type, and there we go. Now I can copy paste this here, and I got some kind of response there. And look at this. So that's really cool. Really quickly, I succeed to create the base of an API, and actually at the same time, the base of a documentation. However, if we look closely at what we do, we put the endpoint, we put the response, but we didn't put the body. So let's get back on find a country by label. And what I'm going to do is, on the top of response, I'm going to put a body example. So I'm going just to copy paste this. And on the body, of course, I gotta pass the country, which will be, of course, France. And here what I can specify is that it will be a string. Okay, so here I got a string with the body. And that's good. We are good. Another thing that we would like to do is to find countries by language. And that could be amazing. So we should look first at our endpoint, and we should look at actually we should look at the countries that we've got. Okay, so we've got our countries there, and these countries, they should have a language. So as we see on the model on TypeScript, we already saw that there's a language which would be an array containing strings. That's amazing. Later, we will be able to create a currency and also to work on a code, capital, or stuff that we want. All right? So we're going to work on these languages at first, and we want to create an endpoint with languages. And we suddenly realize that our countries.find, it's a bit weird, okay, as an endpoint, because find would mean anything. And in our documentation, we can see that we can find a country by label, okay? So, and our titles are very long also. So if we would like to do something more clear, we would have to work on our API endpoint, and we will have to work on our names. All right, I improved a bit this documentation, and I created some endpoints, and let me present them to you now. So we still have this entry here with this stuff that is useless. Actually, I should change it. And it's called fake countries. So I don't know why it's called fake countries. I should have put countries because it's still real countries. So when we click on get started, we arrive on the guide that I worked on. So basically, I've added welcome on fake countries API. I've added the version, the date, how to use it, and the options that we can have. If we look at the documentation of Docus, actually we've got some options that we can add, such as check, danger, and stuff. That's really interesting. I've added some rules. This API is free to use. However, please do not spam or use it more than 100 times per day. We'll banish your IP for 30 days if you spam it. Yeah, that's what I wrote. There's an about section, and we see here on the right actually that we've got a sub-content panel that is really useful on the actual page. And on my API, I've worked on my endpoints. So I try to be very, very concise and very clear about what the API is doing. So what I did actually, I've created an endpoint called getAll, and here we've got this endpoint. This is API country all. So we don't need anybody. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to test actually on my localhost this endpoint. And there we go. Let's look at this. We have the full file actually as a JSON file actually, sorry, about every country and everything we've got on it. That's really cool, okay? That's the endpoint that I've created, and I've kept this model of putting the method and a short description and the endpoint and an example of what we can have. So it can be very useful if you want to use the flag, the name, the code, of whatever. Then I've worked on the random one. So as you see now, we've got API / countries / the name of the endpoint that we're gonna have. So for all, I got /all. For random, I put /random. So when we get back to the server, now we've got our server with the API, because there is another route that I'm going to show you after. And on API, I got a folder countries with all.get, because it's a get, and random, that it's a get also. And what I'm do actually, when I get an object, I'm transforming it to an array, and then I look at it. So basically, we've got all the endpoints there that will be with this API / countries. So here I'm going to try my random endpoint, and there we go. I got a random country there. Then after, on the other methods, by label, by capital, by currency, these are posts. And on those posts, actually, I'm returning not JSONs, I'm returning an array. So basically, here we've got label, so we're going to try it. I'm going to try to catch a country by label. So I'm going to get back there on my previous post, and I'm going to type http://localhost 3000, then with my /. So I'm going just to push that this way. I'm going to get back there. And when I send it, there we go, I got France. If I try to find United something, for instance, United, there we go, I got United Arab Emirates, United Kingdom, United States. So my endpoint, label.post.ts, is working. And also what I did on my endpoints is that I put some guards. So here I got my guards on the label. All right. I did the same with currency. I did the same with capital. So let's try capital. So I'm going to go on the documentation, get by capital. What I can do is to find a country by its capital. So I'm going to type, instead of countries here, capital. And here as capital, I'm going to pass, for instance, Washington. And when I'm going to send it, there we go. I got the countries by capital, which is amazing. What I can do also is to type by currency. And currency is interesting because here with currency, I will have several other countries. So when I type for the euro, I got all the countries of Europe that have the euro as a currency. Let me try to find a doll. No, it's not, yeah, it's working well. It's not doll, it's USD. So there we go. We see all the countries that are using USD, for instance. So what I did, it's exactly the same. I just copied, paste some code, and it's working very good. If there is no currency, we can see that we got also an error, and it's working very well. So now you can go on the documentation and check all of this. It was a quick course to teach you how to use Nuxt content and how to use all the force of Nuxt to create an API and to create a documentation. Of course, we could have done it by creating a full stack application also. It would have worked. However, it would have taken a lot of time to create the whole design, actually the whole template. Instead, using Docus helped us a lot. So this is a good example on how you could create a business. For instance, if you would like to create an API where people could fetch some data, you would add to this a Stripe layer to make people pay and to be able to use the API. Once they pay, they get a token and they can use this token, and you can do a lot of stuff like this. So this is really not a real documentation, okay? This is a start. To end this lesson, I wanted to show you where I found Docus. Actually, I went on Nuxt team. Here on Nuxt team, what you can see is that you have several different themes that you could apply to your Nuxt.js application. So we've got Docus, which is here, and this is the one that I use that helps us to create a documentation on the fly. However, you got some other themes that you could use, and I think in the future there will be more and more themes that will be available under Nuxt free. Not pretending that I can build a whole documentation by myself, and I'm not pretending that I'm an awesome backend developer, but this was a good example to show you how we can use Nuxt and how we can use its power to create a full documentation and a full stack application. So what I would do now, my documentation is online, I would deploy it on Netlify or Vercel, and right away what would happen is that my endpoints would be available on the address provided by Netlify and Vercel. And congratulations, you succeed to create your first documentation and your first full stack application with Nuxt.js. Thank you very much for watching this entire video. I hope it helped you to create a full stack application. See you next time. Bye.